School Figure TV. Revolutionary salute. Revolutionary salute. Like, share, subscribe. Welcome to the House of Revolution. You know I'm your humble host, the Yao Mean of Revolution. Trump mad at the world. Nobody can save him. Iran continues defeating the U.S. I got some late breaking news the revolutionaries can use. Well, it might be the end of these imperialists as Trump threatens the Pope, Trump threatens NATO, Trump threatens the U.S. Trump done lost his mind. Let's get into the content. Salute.
Satellite imagery reveals that Iran has rapidly restored its underground missile base, which Trump has brazenly claimed to have destroyed in his two wars. Analysts' reports confirmed on April 15, 2026, revealing bulldozers and heavy equipment clearing debris from tunnel entrances, attacked by U.S.-Israel on the surface, while Iranian missiles remain completely intact. According to recent reports, Iran is exploiting the ceasefire, reopening access to launchers and ammunition trapped in its underground base, near Khomeini after airstrikes, but Iran has repaired and relaunched within hours. This is only one of hundreds of massive missile cities, within granite mountains, built hundreds of meters underground, designed to withstand heavy bombardment.
And China done sent them the rocket fuel. See, that's all they needed was the fuel. They know how to, they got the components. They got all the components. And remember, the components needed to make advanced weaponry comes from China. The rare earth minerals that the U.S. need to make their advanced weapons, that come from China. So China done already made sure Iran got all the necessary materials they need to make tens of thousands of more missiles and hundreds of thousands of more drones. That's
Iranian excavation of access roads
Trump was
to
just
underground
whining
missile
on the news, talking about he talked to Xi Jinping, and Xi Jinping promised him not to give Iran any more weapons. China immediately came out and said they don't know what the hell he's talking about. They would never talk to him about any of their business. They don't deny, then they don't admit to giving Iran anything, but they said they definitely ain't talked to Trump about it. So that let us know it's a fact. They gave Iran all of the weaponry, all of the components, the rocket fuel and the rare earth minerals needed for Iran to wage war on the U.S. for a long time to come.
Missile bases is simply a war strategy. Iran knows this activity is being monitored via satellite imagery, with the goal of being bombed again by Trump, but this time it appears to be setting a trap to bring down U.S. bombers. A quick victory has become much more difficult, so Trump has opted to attack civilian infrastructure like schools, bridges, and power plants, briefly claiming victory. Iran still retains much of its advanced missile arsenal and continues to strike by adapting its tactics. Iran continues to maintain sufficient stockpile capacity for the next 10 years, even single-handedly destroying enemy targets in multiple countries.
Time. The slow-motion collapse of a supposedly maximum pressure strategy that was never more than a cardboard prop in the first place. It is now just after dawn in the Gulf of Oman, and the shipping lanes are telling a story that Donald Trump and the Pentagon are desperately trying to scrub from the internet.
Is President Trump now claiming the Iran war is completely over after his U.S. naval blockade fails spectacularly too? Iran taunts President Trump after an Iranian ship boldly breaks through the U.S. naval blockade on the very first day, exposing what many see as a major vulnerability in America's regional strategy.
President Trump has said that he was imposing his own blockade, preventing oil and gas and other ships going back and forth to Iran in an effort to try to strangle the Iranian economy and subdue them that way. So far, it doesn't look like it's working.
Despite the chest thumping, despite the official statements from CENTCOM claiming that no ships made it past the U.S. blockade in the first 24 hours, the reality is this. At least 20 Iranian-linked vessels have transited the Strait of Hormuz in the last 36 hours without a single shot being fired, without a single boarding party, and without a single American sailor doing anything more than watching the radar screen with a pair of binoculars and a sinking feeling in their gut. And the real kicker? Washington's military planners aren't trembling at the thought of hitting an Iranian tanker. They are absolutely paralyzed by the terror of accidentally shattering the fragile ceasefire and being drawn into a full-scale conflict that even the most hawkish Pentagon advisors know they cannot win. Meanwhile, Tehran has executed a geopolitical checkmate so audacious and so simple it makes the entire U.S. naval presence in the region look like an overpriced, overhyped parking enforcement operation. As American warships bobbed helplessly in international waters, the Iranian Ministry of Trade and Commerce dropped a bombshell. The full-scale reactivation and militarization of every single land and Caspian Sea trade corridor, a move that doesn't just bypass the blockade, but renders it so laughably impotent that even the outgoing Mossad chief has been forced to make a stunning confession that blows a hole clean through the entire American narrative of regime change. You need to understand precisely how this charade unraveled hour by hour. And if you appreciate raw, unfiltered journalism that refuses to bow to Western talking points, you need to hit that like button and share this video right now. Drop a comment, even if it's just a single character, even just a dot, or better yet, drop a hammer and sickle emoji or the flag of the Islamic Republic to absolutely obliterate the algorithm that tries to silence this truth. And if you haven't already, slam that subscribe button. We are the only ones giving you the real picture, not the sanitized press releases from the Fifth Fleet's Public Affairs Office. This is the story of how Iran outsmarted the empire. And you need to stay tuned, because what I'm about to reveal about the land corridors from China and the secret movement in the Caspian Sea will completely change how you understand this war. Let's talk about the ghost fleet that CENTCOM claims doesn't exist. While American media outlets have been dutifully parroting the line that 6 merchant ships turned around after being instructed by U.S. destroyers, they are deliberately omitting the 20 other vessels that simply didn't stop. Using open source intelligence and maritime traffic data that any of us can verify, vessels like the Panama-flagged Peace Gulf, a tanker notorious for trans-shipping Iranian naphtha, cruised right through the narrowest choke point of the strait, hugging the Iranian coastline under the protective umbrella of shore-based anti-ship batteries. The American destroyers, positioned further out, did nothing. They hailed the ships on Channel 16, and when the Iranian captains replied in Farsi or simply ignored the call, the U.S. Navy blinked. Why?
Stop letting them increase your rates. I used to let them raise my car insurance every year until I found this.
Because the standing orders from CENTCOM are a mess of contradictions. They are under strict command to avoid any kinetic action that might escalate the situation, which is military jargon for, we are terrified of the retaliation. You want names? The Rich Starry, a Chinese-owned tanker heavily sanctioned by the U.S. Treasury transited the Gulf of Oman loaded with 250,000 barrels of methanol, a critical industrial chemical, and the U.S. Navy interdicted it by watching it sail away. The Marines on those decks, fingers on triggers, ended up just taking photographs for the intelligence briefing. There were no warning shots. There were no warning shots across the bow. There was just the sound of waves and the silent, humiliating acknowledgement that the U.S. Navy would rather babysit a ceasefire that Tehran doesn't care about than risk losing a multi-billion-dollar asset to an Iranian supersonic missile. And then came the real masterstroke, the one that Washington's think tank experts in their glass towers never saw coming. On Monday, the Iranian Interior Ministry, under the directive of Eskandar Momeni, issued the order that turned a naval blockade into a strategic joke. They activated the 8,000-kilometer land border with an unprecedented level of military and commercial coordination. While the world was fixated on the narrow strip of water between the UAE and Iran, Tehran simply pivoted east and north. Let's get geographical about this because it's where the high IQ of Iranian strategic planning truly shines against the blunt oafishness of American policy. Iran is not an island. It shares land borders with 7 nations: Iraq, Turkey, Armenia, Azerbaijan, Turkmenistan, Afghanistan, and Pakistan. And just beyond those borders lie the economic giants who have zero interest in American sanctions: China and Russia. As we speak, the Sarak's rail crossing into Turkmenistan is running at 200% of its normal capacity. More than 112,000 trucks carrying nearly 3 million tons of essential goods have cleared customs since the start of the conflict, and that number is doubling every week. This isn't just food and medicine. This is a torrent of dual-use technology, industrial components, and hard currency flowing directly from the Chinese industrial heartland via the Xinjiang corridor into the veins of the Iranian economy. The American blockade at Hormuz is trying to plug a pinhole while the back door to Asia is wide open. They thought they could strangle Iran by controlling 20% of the global oil transit. They forgot Iran controls 100% of its own land borders and the undying loyalty of the Shanghai Cooperation Organization. And don't even get me started on the Caspian Sea. This is where the Trump administration's geographical illiteracy becomes an international punchline. While CENTCOM was issuing those ridiculous statements about fully implementing the blockade, Russian and Iranian freighters were conducting business as usual across the world's largest inland body of water. The Nika terminal on Iran's Caspian coast is a beehive of activity, a direct maritime bypass that links Tehran directly to Moscow and Astrakhan, and from there via the Volga-Don Canal to the open ocean without ever sniffing the Arabian Gulf. The U.S. Navy has exactly 0 ships in the Caspian Sea. They have exactly 0 leverage there. It's a sealed-off Iranian-Russian lake for all intents and purposes. Furthermore, the Iranian military posture has shifted brilliantly. By reactivating these land and Caspian routes, Tehran has removed the primary strategic incentive to keep the Gulf open at all costs. This gives Iran's military the cold, calculating option to, if they choose, asymmetrically disrupt Arab shipping in retaliation without starving themselves. They can afford a strike on a Saudi or Emirati port because their own people are being fed through Turkmenistan and Russia. The blockade didn't weaken Iran's hand. It gave Iran the perfect excuse to finally decouple its economy from the vulnerability of the Strait of Hormuz entirely. It's the equivalent of trying to cut off a man's air supply, only to discover he's been breathing underwater through a hose you didn't know existed. And what has been the American response to this breathtaking failure? Lies. The usual pathetic, gaslighting lies we've come to expect from CENTCOM. They issued a statement bragging about turning back 6 ships, a laughable number in the context of global shipping, and then had the audacity to claim that Iran's maritime trade has stopped. It hasn't stopped. It's just being conducted on terms the United States cannot control. And as this farce played out on the water, Donald Trump, sensing the political disaster of his own making, immediately pivoted to the only thing he knows: deception. He floated the idea that the war was essentially over and that Iran was ready to negotiate. He's desperate to change the subject because the entire world can see the U.S. Navy doing nothing but costing American taxpayers billions in fuel and maintenance while floating around like a lost fishing expedition. But the final devastating nail in the coffin of the American narrative came not from Tehran, but from Tel Aviv. In a moment of staggering honesty, the outgoing chief of Mossad has reportedly admitted a truth that shatters every single talking point the Biden and Trump administrations have built this illegal war upon. The assessment from Israel's own intelligence apparatus is that the government of Mojtaba Khamenei is infinitely more inflexible, more ideologically rigid, and more strategically mature than the tenure of his late father, Ali Khamenei. They expected chaos. They got consolidation. They expected a moderate. They got a hardliner who doesn't just want to resist, he wants to win. The Wall Street Journal, a mouthpiece for the globalist elite, was forced to concede in a moment of rare candor that the war has produced regime change for the worse. That is their admission that the entire basis for this conflict, the fantasy of a pro-American Iran, was a catastrophic intelligence failure. The Israelis are now warning Washington that they've created a militarized Iran that is more dangerous than the one they bombed on February 28th. The entire operation, from the bunker busters to the naval blockade, has backfired with the force of a supernova. So, Let's call this what it is, a social media charade, a multi-trillion-dollar exercise in American humiliation. There are over 10,000 U.S. sailors in the region, a dozen warships, and dozens of aircraft, and they have been reduced to a glorified spectator sport. They are watching Iranian and Chinese vessels cruise by, waving in the breeze, because the only thing keeping the peace right now is the Iranian military's self-control, not American power. Russia and China have refused to abide by the terms of this illegal blockade, and energy continues to flow to the markets that matter. The slow pace at Iranian ports isn't a sign of fear. It's a sign of logistical efficiency and a deliberate, methodical clearance by the Iranian military to ensure nothing is left to chance. The U.S. thought it could cage the lion of Persia. Instead, it just opened the door to the east, and there is no closing it now. This is the new reality. This is the failure of the blockade, and anyone who tells you otherwise is selling you a fiction from the White House briefing room.
Should these glasses be illegal in the US? Nobody believed me at first, but now everybody wants a pair. My friends roasted me for buying miracle glasses online.
Well, my dear truth seekers, unfortunately, the situation in the Middle East continues to deteriorate rapidly. Experts admit that the failure of the US-Israeli coalition to inflict a quick and crushing defeat on Iran may prompt Washington and Tel Aviv to escalate the current war. Simultaneously with this, the situation also continues to deteriorate rapidly in the Lebanese direction of the front, where Israeli combat aviation is literally wiping out Lebanese cities, along with the civilian population. So, a few hours ago, independent monitoring services reported that the IDF, during the Operation Eternal Darkness, in southern Lebanon, completely wiped off the map the town of Al-Qaim. At the same time, the Israeli military continues the systematic destruction of the city of Bint Jubail, and airstrikes on the Lebanese capital, Beirut. As of April 15, 2026, the number of Lebanese casualties is simply appalling. It is reported that starting from March 2, 2026, after the Israeli army invaded southern Lebanon, the number of people killed reached 2,100, while the number of wounded has already exceeded 100,000. In the last 24 hours alone, 35 civilians have been killed by Israeli army strikes in southern Lebanon. Reports indicate that due to the actions of Israeli combat aviation and artillery, entire families were trapped under the ruins of residential buildings in Lebanese towns such as Adlaun, Shabriha, and Arab Salim. In addition, on April 14, the IDF also destroyed a hospital in the town of Tibnan and inflicted devastating artillery strikes on the densely populated areas of Sidon and Nabatee. Against this background, the number of Lebanese refugees also continues to grow. At the moment, their number has already exceeded 1 million people. Meanwhile, the Israeli authorities have stated that the IDF operation will continue until southern Lebanon falls under Israeli control. The Israeli authorities claim that only the capture of the southern part of Lebanon supposedly will help to completely stop Hezbollah's rocket attacks on the northern part of Israel. However, Hezbollah continues to put up fierce resistance, causing significant damage to Israeli units. According to American think tanks, the IDF is suffering heavy losses in southern Lebanon in both manpower and equipment. At the same time, experts note that the IDF has not experienced such unprecedented losses since the 1980s. Against this backdrop, on the morning of April 14, Italian Prime Minister Giorgia Meloni announced that Italy is completely suspending military cooperation with Israel, and that Rome is stopping the transfer of not only intelligence information to Israel, but also technological solutions in the military technical sphere. According to Giorgia Meloni, this decision was made against the backdrop of growing global protests against the war in the Middle East and its consequences for the global economy. Thus, Italy became the second European country to oppose Israel's actions in the Middle East openly. Earlier, Spanish Prime Minister Pedro Sanchez openly condemned Israel for its actions in Lebanon, calling on the international community to do everything to prevent the IDF from turning Lebanon into a second Gaza. It is noteworthy that Donald Trump reacted very negatively to Meloni's refusal to extend military cooperation with Israel. In addition, the current occupant of the White House criticized the Italian Prime Minister for her refusal to help the United States unblock the Strait of Hormuz. According to Trump, he is very disappointed with Italy's position on the situation in the Middle East. At the same time, he added that even though Italy is in great need of oil from the Middle East, Giorgia Meloni simply lacks the courage to help the United States unblock the Strait of Hormuz. Meanwhile, on April 14, at least 3 Iranian oil tankers were unable to enter the Gulf of Oman due to the blockade by American warships. Reports indicate that U.S. warships did not detain these vessels, but ordered them to go back to the Iranian ports. Thus, the United States began to block the Strait of Hormuz by closing the Gulf of Oman entrance. At the same time, the Americans stop only those ships that have left or are going to Iranian ports. Against this backdrop, experts have already stated that the double blockade of the Strait of Hormuz will further increase oil prices. Furthermore, U.S. Secretary of Energy Chris Wright admitted that if the Strait of Hormuz is not opened in the coming days, oil prices will continue to rise and reach their peak in a few weeks. In addition, it became known that Saudi Arabia reacted strongly against the United States blockade of the Strait of Hormuz. Currently, the Saudi authorities are demanding that the United States lift the blockade of the Strait of Hormuz and try to resolve this issue through diplomacy. The Saudi authorities fear that, against the backdrop of the blocking of the Strait of Hormuz by the United States, Iran will order Yemen's Houthis to block the Bab el-Mandeb Strait, as a result of which the Suez Canal will also be blocked. The Saudi authorities note that if this happens, it will destabilize the entire Middle East and pose a huge problem for the global economy. Meanwhile, the authoritative American publication, Military Watch magazine, citing its own sources in the Pentagon, confirmed that during a missile attack on American military facilities in Qatar, Iran managed to destroy the world's most expensive early warning radar station, an FPS-132 Block 5, worth more than $1 billion. This radar was capable of detecting ballistic missile launches at a range of 5,000 kilometers, and providing early warning of attacks within minutes of launch. It is well known that the American radar, destroyed in Qatar, monitored not only the countries of the Middle East, but also the launches of ballistic missiles on the territory of Russia. Experts say that the destruction of such a unique radar not only blinded the United States and the Middle East, but also deprived the Pentagon of the ability to monitor the launches of the latest ballistic missiles in Russia. It is reported that the United States will need 9 years and tens of billions of dollars to replace this unique early warning radar station. However, the U.S. problems did not end there. As it turned out, during the rescue operation of the F-15 pilot, and the attempt by a U.S. Special Forces unit to seize enriched uranium near Isfahan, the United States lost not only 10 aircraft and dozens of elite soldiers, but also allowed Iran to acquire the latest infrared anti-missile system, also known as Large Aircraft Infrared Countermeasures System, and AAQ-24 LAIRCM. Unfortunately for the United States, this latest complex survived aboard the destroyed American military transport aircraft, MC-130J Commando 2.
ممكن جاي اللينز الشي دقيقة هنا تمام
The uniqueness of this latest American complex lies in its ability to blind and disable anti-aircraft missiles with powerful laser radiation. Almost all American military aircraft are armed with these protection complexes. By the way, sources have confirmed that Iranian and Russian engineers have already begun studying this unique American complex. Experts note that studying such a valuable trophy will allow Iranian and Russian engineers to find effective measures to counter American anti-missile systems, as a result of which the number of downed American aircraft may skyrocket shortly.
The complete and utter collapse of America. Well, ladies and gentlemen, what we are witnessing unfold across the Middle East right now is nothing short of the complete and utter collapse of American imperial hubris. If you've been following the news, you've heard the bluster from Washington. Donald Trump, in his infinite reality TV wisdom, ordered a naval blockade of the Islamic Republic of Iran. The Pentagon, with all its shiny hardware and trillions of dollars in budget, claimed they had sealed off the Strait of Hormuz and Iranian ports with an iron fist, U.S.
Ibrahim Zulfagari. According to him, if the United States moves forward in the Strait of Hormuz, the strategic Bab el-Mandeb could be next, raising the specter of a widening maritime flashpoint.
Riyadh has warned Washington that the U.S. blockade might prompt Houthis to block the Bab el-Mandeb Strait in retaliation.
President Trump has said that he was imposing his own blockade, preventing oil and gas and other ships going back and forth to Iran in an effort to try to...
For the first time in modern history, college student graduates
strangle the Iranian economy and subdue them that way. So far, it doesn't look like it's working.
Central Command has been repeating the same tired line over and over again. No ships made it past the U.S. blockade. But here is the reality they don't want you to see on the evening news in the West. The blockade has failed. It has failed so spectacularly that it has exposed the U.S. Navy as a paper tiger in the face of Iranian resolve. We have confirmed reports backed by independent maritime tracking data and Iranian state media that vessels are still moving. The OFAC-sanctioned Iranian vessel Golban, a ship Washington specifically wanted to strangle, continues its transit near the Strait of Hormuz, despite the U.S. Navy's presence. Another bulk carrier, the Sea Champion, successfully passed through the strait into the Sea of Oman. This isn't just a minor leak in the blockade, it's a gaping hole, and this is where the panic in the Pentagon truly begins. Because the Iranians didn't stop at just slipping ships past the American guns. They changed the entire geometry of the battlefield. Reports have emerged of serious naval activities by the Iranian armed forces that have sent shockwaves through American strategic planners. We are talking about the movement of anti-ship missile batteries and, most crucially, the detected laying of naval mines around the Bab al-Mandab Strait. That's the Gate of Tears, the southern choke point of the Red Sea. By activating the second front, Iran has effectively told the world, if you blockade us in the Persian Gulf, you will have no trade in the Red Sea either. The Iranian military leadership has been unequivocal, stating that if the U.S. continues this illegal blockade, the flow of commerce in the Persian Gulf, the Sea of Oman, and the Red Sea will come to a grinding halt, period. This is not a bluff. It's a strategic masterstroke that has turned the tables on the American Navy, forcing them to operate in waters where they are now terrified of hitting mines. The freedom of navigation the U.S. Navy loves to preach about is now a distant memory. Their ships are tiptoeing around a potential minefield of Iran's making. And let's be absolutely clear about the political context. The U.S. blocking of Hormuz is not just a military action. It is, as Iranian officials have rightly pointed out, a direct prelude to violating the fragile ceasefire. It is a textbook act of bad faith from a regime that knows nothing else. In the face of this unyielding Iranian position, what did Trump do? He didn't send more ships into the minefield. No, he panicked. He turned to Beijing, suddenly remembering that China exists and that maybe they can help stop the militarization of the waters around the Islamic Republic, after his own illegal blockade has done nothing but accelerate it. It's a breathtaking display of desperation. And while Trump runs around posting on social media that China is very happy he's permanently opening the Strait of Hormuz, let's look at the reality on the water. Trump claims China has agreed not to supply weapons to Iran. This is the same rhetoric of a desperate man trying to spin a massive retreat as a victory. The fact is, the Iranian Navy has already challenged the U.S. Navy to the point where Washington is effectively retreating from its maximalist demands. The U.S. fears that ships might hit mines or that the entrance to the Red Sea will be shut completely. Before we get into the details of this American capitulation and the massive military buildup they're rushing into the region, I need to stop and ask you for a favor. The kind of reporting we do here, the honest, unfiltered truth about Western hypocrisy and the resistance of nations like Iran.
$100 trillion AI black swan is about to hit the tech industry, and the mainstream media is asleep at the switch yet again.
It doesn't get the algorithm boost that corporate media does. If you want to support honest journalism that isn't afraid to call out Washington and Tel Aviv, hit that like button and share this video. Drop a comment below. Even if it's just a dot or a simple word, it helps overpower the algorithmic censorship. And if you haven't already, please subscribe to this channel. It's the only way we can keep bringing you these in-depth updates without having to bend the knee to the very powers we critique. Now, where was I? Ah, yes, the frantic response from Washington. The failed blockade has triggered not a recalibration of strategy, but a classic American overreaction. A desperate, massive injection of troops and hardware into a theater that is already boiling over. The Washington Post, citing U.S. officials, is reporting that a staggering number of additional forces are on their way to the region. We're talking about roughly 6,000 personnel aboard the USS George H.W. Bush carrier strike group, along with its attendant fleet of warships. As if that wasn't enough, another 4,200 Marines and sailors from the Boxer Amphibious Ready Group. We're talking about roughly 6,000 personnel aboard the USS George H.W. Bush carrier strike group, along with its attendant fleet of warships. As if that wasn't enough, another 4,200 Marines and sailors from the Boxer Amphibious Ready Group and the 11th Marine Expeditionary Unit are being shoved into the furnace. The air bridge over the Atlantic is absolutely beaming with activity. C-17s and C-5s ferrying the machinery of war to staging bases in Europe and the Middle East. This is the classic desperate American playbook. When diplomacy and sanctions fail, and when the threat of military force is met with a shrug and a missile battery, you send more aircraft carriers. You send more Marines. You try to intimidate with numbers, but here's the tragic irony for the Pentagon. All this hardware is now sailing towards a sea littered with mines. Mines that, according to some reports, even the Iranian military cannot precisely account for after the chaotic early days of the conflict. U.S. warships are essentially entering a floating minefield of their own making, all because Donald Trump's ego couldn't handle being told no at the negotiation table. And what a negotiation table it has been. Let's pull back the curtain on the diplomatic farce that has been unfolding behind the scenes. The official Islamabad talks collapsed spectacularly because the United States, in its arrogance, came not to negotiate, but to dictate terms of surrender. Iran, having weathered the storm of unprovoked American and Israeli aggression, flatly refused. So, what does Washington do when it can't bully someone into submission? It starts sending secret messages. The back channels have been humming, and the key conduit is Pakistan. We saw a high-level Pakistani delegation, led by none other than the Army Chief Asim Munir, landing in Tehran. This wasn't a casual visit. Reports confirm that the delegation was there to deliver a U.S. message to Tehran and to lay the groundwork for a second round of negotiations. The rumor mill is in overdrive, and the whispers from diplomatic circles suggest that the messages being carried included Trump's willingness to open the strait permanently while agreeing in part to Iran's core conditions. This is the great irony of the moment. Washington, which started this by demanding Iran bend the knee, is now secretly sending word through Pakistani generals that it is willing to cut a deal on Iran's terms. The American president, who loves to project an image of strength, is engaged in what looks suspiciously like a covert surrender. However, Tehran is not easily fooled. The Iranian Foreign Ministry spokesman, Esmail Baghai, has been refreshingly direct about these shenanigans. He has publicly denied reports of a simple ceasefire extension, stating that such rumors are not confirmed and that the United States must prove its seriousness. He emphasized that U.S. attempts to isolate Iran are not only illegal, but could actively create grounds for a ceasefire violation. The Iranian military, as Baghai noted, is fully prepared to respond appropriately if necessary. And if necessary is a big phrase right now because the military is not sitting on its hands. As the ceasefire nears its end, the message from the Iranian armed forces is one of absolute unwavering readiness. They have stated that they did not use their full military capacity during the previous defensive operations and that they are prepared to unveil new missile, drone, and warfare capabilities that are far beyond the enemy's imagination. The Defense Ministry has made it clear that the nation is fully equipped to sustain prolonged operations. This is a stark warning to the U.S. and Israel. The forces are ready, the missiles are stocked, and the will of the people is unbroken. The Bab al-Mandab is not just a point on a map. It's a pressure point that Iran can squeeze whenever it chooses, thanks to its allied forces in Yemen. The U.S. military, despite its bluster about eliminating any ship that comes close to their blockade, is now navigating a perilous and humiliating situation where they cannot even guarantee the safety of their own vessels, let alone control the flow of global commerce. So where does this leave us? It leaves us watching the unspooling of a geopolitical thriller where the ending was written not in Washington, but in Tehran. The U.S. has ordered a blockade that doesn't block. It has rushed troops into a region where they are sitting ducks for asymmetrical warfare. It has secretly begged for a deal on terms dictated by the nation it set out to destroy. Donald Trump, the man who loves to talk about strength, is demonstrating the very definition of weakness. He wanted to isolate Iran. Instead, he has united the Islamic Republic and its allies across the region. He wanted to cripple Iran's economy. Instead, he has sent global energy markets into a panic that hurts his own allies more. The Iranian Navy didn't just challenge the U.S. Navy. It exposed the hollow core of American military power in the 21st century. As the ceasefire deadline of April 22nd approaches, the ball is entirely in Washington's court. They can either accept the new reality of Iranian strength and come to the table as equals, or they can continue this charade of force and watch as their empire sinks further into the sands of a war they cannot win. The Iranian military is ready. The American planners are in shock. And the world is watching as the myth of U.S. naval invincibility crumbles in the face of real determined resistance. We will continue to bring you updates as this story develops.
$76 per hour.
Media spin a narrative that depicts China as a disruptor of the global order. But the latest crisis in the Middle East has pulled back the curtain on who is actually acting as the adult in the room. Today, we'll look at President Trump's sudden naval blockade of the Strait of Hormuz and the stark contrast between Washington's maximum pressure and Beijing's calls for stability, peace, and a return to normalcy. This is Reports on China. I'm Andy Boham here in Shanghai. Let's get reporting. The situation in the Gulf reached a tipping point this week after peace talks in Islamabad, Pakistan, faltered. On Monday, the US began a targeted blockade of Iranian ports, an act China's Ministry of Foreign Affairs immediately labeled as a dangerous and irresponsible act that risks undermining an already fragile ceasefire situation. Foreign Ministry spokesperson Guo Jiakun told a press conference that Beijing is committed to restoring peace, stating, China believes that only by achieving a comprehensive ceasefire and ending the war can we fundamentally create conditions for easing the situation in the Strait. China urges all parties to abide by the ceasefire agreements, focus on the general direction of dialogue and peace talks, take practical actions to promote the easing of the regional situation, and restore normal traffic in the Strait as soon as possible. While China is calling for the world to get back to normal, the US administration and its media cheerleaders are busy escalating the rhetoric. According to the BBC, US Vice President J.D. Vance has accused Iran of economic terrorism and, acting like a schoolyard bully rather than a statesman, openly bragged about the US retaliating in kind. Vance told Fox News, "Well, as the President of the United States showed, two can play at that game. If the Iranians are going to try to engage in economic terrorism, we're going to abide by the simple principle that no Iranian ships are getting out either." This eye for an eye mentality is exactly what China is trying to prevent. But if you look at how outlets like DW News are reporting this, you'll see they are more concerned with attacking China's peaceful stance than questioning US aggression. In an article titled "Iran War, US Blockade of Hormuz Tests China's Restraint," DW tries to frame China's logical response as a mere narrative or hegemonic logic. DW News reports, Chinese state media, meanwhile, has framed the US blockade as part of a hegemonic logic of resorting to force when negotiations fail. According to that narrative, Washington has been mobilizing military in the Middle East as part of preparations to escalate the war. Chinese media is portraying the US as eager for a graceful exit from the conflict, even resorting to packaging victory by claiming it had achieved its objectives. It is truly fascinating. When the US literally launches a naval blockade, an act of war, DW News calls it propaganda or a narrative when Chinese media points out the obvious. The reality, which these outlets conveniently ignore, is that China is the only major power doing the heavy lifting of diplomacy. The Guardian recently reported on a joint 5-part peace proposal from Pakistan and China, noting that the two nations agree that dialogue and diplomacy were the only viable options to resolve conflicts. Furthermore, as The Spectator points out, while Washington is busy with military gambles, Beijing's response has been measured and focused on the interests of the international community. While the US is causing global energy prices to skyrocket, with petrol prices already skyrocketing around the world, China is focused on maintaining the flow of global trade. ABC News highlights that while overall traffic through the Strait has plummeted, China remains a stabilizing force. China has not joined the confrontation, but neither has it stepped away from the economic relationship that sustains Iran. It avoids direct confrontation, maintains access where possible, and adjusts its exposure in response to risk. So that is what adult behavior looks like. China isn't looking for a fight. It wants the Strait reopened and the conflict ended because it values stability, not just for itself, but for the entire world. Yet the Trump administration continues to use what the Chinese Foreign Ministry calls malicious linkage and groundless smears. CNBC and the BBC report that Trump has threatened China with a 50% tariff if it supplies weapons to Iran, a claim Beijing has dismissed as completely made up. Spokesman Guo Jiakun rightly noted, China will resolutely retaliate with countermeasures against any US attempt to use weapon sales as a pretext for additional tariffs. What's even more revealing is how some Western outlets are starting to realize that this maximum pressure might actually hurt the US and its allies more than it hurts China. The Spectator published an illuminating piece titled, "The Hormuz Blockade Won't Hurt China," which argues that Beijing's long-term planning has left it remarkably insulated, they wrote. The conventional assumption is that China's dependence on the Gulf makes it acutely vulnerable. China is among the countries the best insulated against its closure. China's state and commercial reserves are estimated at roughly 1.4 billion barrels, enough to cover 4 months of total imports. The article points out that China's lead in electrification, with EVs displacing massive amounts of oil demand, and its energy rice bowl strategy have prepared it for this exact contingency. Compare that to US allies like Japan, which sources 70% of its oil through the strait and has no comparable buffer. As The Spectator poignantly asks, with friends like Washington, Tokyo might reasonably ask, who needs adversaries? Despite being the best positioned to weather the storm, China is not gloating. It's using its position to demand an immediate end to hostilities. As reported by Democracy Now!, Chinese Defense Minister Dong Jun made the position very clear. We have trade and energy agreements with Iran. We expect others not to interfere in our affairs. The Strait of Hormuz is open to us. So the US is conducting a dangerous and irresponsible blockade. Its leaders are talking about economic terrorism, and its strategy is causing a global food and energy catastrophe. Meanwhile, China is trading peacefully, proposing peace plans, and acting as the only major power trying to bring the world back to normal. If only outlets like DW News and the Wall Street Journal spent as much time analyzing the actual reckless aggression coming from Washington, as opposed to nitpicking Chinese peace proposals and media reports, they might actually publish something worth reading for once. We can only cross our fingers. And on that note, that will be all for today, you guys. But as always, I'd love to know what you guys think.
defenses and operates outside of the reality-based are able to transit, and that there's been virtually no interruption of Iranian shipping in shipping coming from Iranian ports. So, you know, we have conflicting narratives. I would say that I support the Iranian narrative because it seems to be more reality-based. You know, the notion, first of all, there's no American shipping in the Strait of Hormuz. So the United States doesn't have a physical presence there. So how can they dictate what happens through the strait? They're not controlling that. The implication is that by putting, you know, some sort of picket line further out into the, you know, the Gulf of Oman and into the Indian Ocean, that they're effectively interdicting illicit traffic. But the fact is, the United States can operate close to the Iranian shore and is not operating close to the Iranian shore. Their ships operate in a standoff, which creates a huge buffer zone for the transit of shipping that operates under the umbrella of Iranian missile defenses and operates outside of the span of control of the United States Navy. So logically speaking, the narrative put forward by Central Command in the White House doesn't conform to reality. So but it's impossible to say. I've always said that this blockade is pure political theater. That it's
yeah.
We're back.
Can you hear me, Scott?
I can hear. Yeah, there's just a little internet disruption.
You're back.
Well, I've just always said this political
said,
theater, designed to create the perception of American prowess, American power, so that Trump can more effectively engage in negotiations, which are ongoing, by the way. I mean, people should understand that there was never, Vance went home and the senior Iranian leadership went home, but left in Islamabad are technical teams that continue to pound away. And there's now talk about high-level representation falling back in on Islamabad as early as Thursday. Donald Trump is speaking about a very spectacular 2 days coming up. I just think this blockade was always an act of political theater that would allow Donald Trump to buy off on a peace plan by making the case to the American people that this peace plan was only made possible because of the American blockade. That's my opinion.
He had a phone call with Xi Jinping. He said that he's happy because I'm going to open the Strait of Hormuz. It's unbelievable because the Strait of Hormuz was open for China. They didn't have any difficulty.
No problem. The Chinese have basically told the United States to pound sand and keep their hands off a Chinese ship. But if Trump wants to take credit, look, China doesn't care. I don't think Iran cares if Trump's blustering and all that. If Trump wants to lie to the American people and the American people want to believe that lie, that's our internal domestic political problem. As far as the Iranians are concerned, the reality is the reality. And at the end of the day, there will have to be some, I guess, political compromises made on the part of Iran. And I think the Iranians are mature enough to understand this, that Trump is in a very difficult position politically right now. He got involved in a war that I think in retrospect, he wishes he never got involved in. And I smile, not because on the other hand, this war has cost thousands of lives. Most of them are innocent Iranian lives. And the damage that has been done to Iran is real. It's not big, but, so the smile isn't meant to belittle these horrific losses. The smile is just sort of a physiological response to the stupidity of it all. I mean, this is just really lunacy, and this president has, boxed himself into a corner, and he wants out, and there is a pathway out, but he has to make sure that this pathway can be sold to the American public as a victory for Donald Trump, and that's tough to do when there's been no victory whatsoever. I mean, the United States hasn't achieved any of its objectives. Iran has emerged from this tragic conflict stronger than ever. I mean, we keep talking about the destroyed Iranian Navy, and yet we had to acknowledge that they still have their fast boats that can lay mines, and they have submarines that can operate. We sunk, surface warfare ships that were never going to effectively challenge the United States to begin with. So we carried out a campaign, a naval campaign that has no impact on the reality that's faced, that Iran's Navy was more than just some surface ships. Iran's Navy right now has ballistic missiles and drone capabilities that allow it to control the Strait of Hormuz and project power off Iranian shores to keep the United States Navy at bay. So which Navy is one that...
Wondering where to invest $1,000 in 2026? And you're thinking about investing in AI?
This conflict.
Do you see Donald Trump recognizing his sort of mistakes because he had some sort of agenda, some sort of understanding, or he was, we can say he had some sort of objectives in this operation, which led to this trap, in my opinion, in the Middle East. Does he recognize that?
The internet came out, so you have to repeat the first part of that question.
Yeah, my question is because of some sort of false assumption on the part of Donald Trump, he entered this war in the Middle East. Does he recognize those false assumptions on his part? Does he recognize his sort of role in what has happened to him?
Well, Donald Trump isn't a man that seems to be capable of much self-reflection. He's a man that suffers from sort of malignant narcissistic personality disorder. He's psychotic in that manner. He has an ego the size of the moon, and he believes he can do no wrong. So it's not about Donald Trump reflecting on the mistakes he's made. What Donald Trump is trying to do is push the mistakes off onto the shoulders of others. And there will be heads that roll because of this. Interestingly enough, it'll be curious to see how he deals with Israel, because this war was sold to Donald Trump by Benjamin Netanyahu and the head of the Israeli Mossad. And almost universally, Trump's advisors, military and civilian alike, cautioned against accepting the Israeli, assessments at face value. And today, pretty much everything the Israelis laid out turned out to be false. They said they could achieve regime change. They haven't. They said they could suppress ballistic missile launch capabilities. They couldn't. They've accomplished nothing. And so I think Donald Trump recognizes this. He, his thing is he's bought into the Pete Hegseth formulation of, massive bombardment automatically equals victory because the enemy is intimidated. And Donald Trump seems to be very frustrated and perplexed by the fact that the Iranians don't acknowledge the scope and scale of their defeat. Isn't it obvious you've been defeated? But then Donald Trump doesn't understand warfare at this point in time, because blowing up empty buildings or blowing up buildings that have civilians in them doesn't constitute victory. And the reality is we haven't destroyed much in Iran. That's just a statement of fact. And some of that's been proven. For instance, the Iranian Air Force is starting to emerge from their underground, hide facilities. We've destroyed a bunch of derelict aircraft, but the newest model of Russian helicopters, the Mi-28s, are out flying over Tehran. F-4s are flying, F-14s are flying. I haven't heard any reports of the MiGs or the Su-35s yet, but I'm sure they're there someplace. We haven't accomplished anything. Iran is producing missiles. It's not just they retain missiles, they're producing missiles as we speak. So we haven't impacted their missile production facility. What we have done is blown up a lot of facilities that had been evacuated. We blew up a lot of empty buildings, and we killed a lot of civilians because of the collateral damage or just outright bad targeting on the part of a U.S. Defense Department / War Department that was told to pursue maximum lethality and with minimum legality. It's a war crime, straight up war crime. I don't think Trump is capable of this kind of self-reflection at this point in time, though. And I don't think the U.S. establishment is capable of this. And when they do, it's not going to be about, identifying problems and coming up with solutions. It's going to be about who gets the blame, whose head's going to be put on a platter and who gets to stay.
Scott, before this war started, you remember you and I were discussing about what would be the objectives of the war, what would they do? Our understanding, because of what has happened during the 12-day war, we thought that Israel has a lot of intelligence coming out of Iran. They have a lot, they know a lot. But the outcome of what has happened so far in the second round of war, do you think they were somehow bragging to Donald Trump? Because it doesn't show that they knew where is the missile production, drone production. They're just hitting civilians.
Yeah, I think first of all, intelligence isn't static. Okay, I've done it for a long time. You may have, if I'm collecting, I do a collection management plan. I'm given a problem. The way intelligence work is supposed to work is that the leadership identifies a problem. A problem is identified to them, and they're looking for solutions. And so a question is posed, can Iran produce missiles of a certain range? Or, how does Iran plan to safeguard missile production? Or, where is Iranian leadership? These questions are posed. And then my job as intelligence officer is take that question and then break it down into specific components. How do I, what the sub questions are. And then as I do that, then I have to do an assessment and say, okay, what are the essential elements of information to answer this? And how do I collect that information? If I have a question, what assets and resources do I use? And so I'll come up with a collection management plan that puts human resources, technical resources, imagery resources, all that on this problem. And then I start collecting information. As I collect information, I can refine my assessments. I can ask new questions. I can, but if you do a good job, you should come up with an answer. And then you brief your boss. Now the boss will ask follow-on questions, but understand that just because you got it right the first time, I've done this before. I've gone before and I've nailed it. Boom, brief the 4-star general. This is it, baby. But then you got to stay on track. You can't allow yourself to pat yourself on the back and rest on your laurels because things move. As I'm collecting, for instance, the enemy, the target, if they're smart, they're changing the way they do things just as a matter of course. They're listening to, what's being said. Unfortunately, in the West, if you make politicians feel comfortable about something, they tend to talk about it. And they don't talk directly, they talk indirectly, but the hostile forces are listening and they're saying, they're on to something here. Let's change what we're doing. And if I'm not doing my job, keeping the net out there, doing my job, monitoring the change, come back on, hey, boss, the thing I told you last week, I don't think we can be so solid anymore because it looks like the Iranians have done this, that, and the other thing. They might be moving in this direction. Boom, boom, boom. But see, once I get the problem with the intelligence community is they're not like me. I don't give a flying you-know-what. I'll tell you what the facts are. And I've been fired before. General Schwarzkopf fired me in the middle of the Gulf War because I told him the uncomfortable truth. I won't massage data to make the boss happy. I will tell the boss what it is. And if it makes him unhappy, that's his problem, not my problem. Except I got fired. They rehired me because they knew I was right, but it doesn't matter. But unfortunately, there's people today who view this as if they don't make their boss happy, they don't get promoted. If they don't get promoted, their career is over. And so once you positively brief the boss, you want to keep the boss happy. So they keep telling the boss the same lie, or they keep shaping data to reinforce that assessment, which made the boss happy. And what happens is the difference between the theory, the fiction they're selling and reality becomes the gap becomes huge. And that's where we're at today. I think after June, the Israelis had some good insight into the Iranians. I mean, they had collection plans in place. But then what happened is they rested on their laurels. And the Iranians, on the other hand, had to change everything. I mean, what do you do when you find out that the Mossad has built drone factories on your own soil that have been there for a long time? I mean, you don't simply go there and shut down the drone factory. You have to sit there and go, how the hell did this happen? It's just a systemic dysfunction within our system. We have to change everything. But the Mossad sitting there going, we had drone factories and we were doing some cool stuff with the drones, and everybody's patting themselves on the back, how good they are. And what they don't realize is the Iranians are changing the whole game on them, just redefining how things work. And if you're not in there moving this stuff, and the Iranians rolled up a bunch of networks, and then the Israelis said, well, we got a backup network. Yeah, but the backup network wasn't doing what this network was doing. There's a good gap. The point is, I think the Israelis became too cocky, too confident, and the Iranians did the appropriate things. I mean, history will show if they ever talk about it. We'll find out about this. But the Iranians shuffled the deck, so to speak, which means now the Israelis had an imperfect assessment. That the assessment that Trump received from Netanyahu and the Mossad chief on February 11th was an assessment that may have been valid in June, July, maybe August, but it started to get dated in September, October, November. And then they really got cocky again because of the demonstrations. And so they focused on that. They didn't realize the Iranians are on top of everything. The president got briefed on bad intelligence. Bad assessments derive from bad intelligence and incomplete understanding. And I think that's where we're at today. We don't have a clue what Iran's doing. I mean, a smart person.
Here's the reality. Your college degree took 4 years and $100,000. AI skills
should be able to reverse engineer what has happened and come up with appropriate conclusions. The problem is when you do that, you oftentimes come with an assessment that is so far removed from the assessment that is originally briefed the boss. And it becomes politically difficult to come in front of the boss and say, everybody was wrong. Because how do you do that? I mean, if you're a junior analyst and you're good, this is not rocket science. This is easy. Reverse engineering, this is the simplest thing in the world. But now you have to come to your boss and say, you were wrong. And the boss is sitting there already spending last year's bonus that he got because he was supposedly so good and looking forward to his new promotion and the vacation that comes with the promotion. And now the boy that works for him comes in and says, you were wrong. And we got to go and tell your boss that you were wrong. Nobody wants to do that. So they say, well, Ritter, let me see what you got here. Hey, Anderson. They bring over Anderson, who's a good ass-kissing yes boy. Take a look at these facts. Anderson comes back, Scott's overemphasizing this, and they start to smother the assessments. And so then what happens is maybe a little bit comes up here so they can blame this person, deflect onto this person, but you never get the comprehensive relook that needs to happen. That's what happens when you have politicized intelligence. And the U.S. intelligence community is 100% politicized. We don't know how to tell the truth anymore. We don't have people who are willing to put it all on the line in defense of solid intelligence assessments.
Scott, how did Iranian attacks on American bases in the region influence the gathering of intelligence? Because we know when the war has started, Donald Trump said he was surprised by the Iranian attack on GCC countries. But part of that, they were attacking radars, and part of that was attack on CIA and Mossad offices in the region. How did that influence the whole concept of gathering information?
Well, I mean, it complicates it. I mean, you have resources. I think the human intelligence dimension, was severely disrupted, but it was always going to be because, you have peacetime human intelligence collection, which operates under completely different rules than wartime human intelligence collection. So I think by targeting the Mossad and the CIA, capabilities, it didn't have that much of an impact because we had already transitioned into wartime collection, which is different, more technical in nature. And hopefully from the Iranian perspective, they took that into consideration. But the thing about war is that, look, Iran has to do things. I don't want to give away too much here, but I mean, you do things in wartime that are predictable. And because they're predictable, for instance, I, as a military professional, could do things that make Iran respond. It's called shaking the tree. And then I will have my capabilities focused on the fruit that's dropping from the tree. And because it's war, Iran doesn't have too much time to be cute. They're going to be doing stuff. So if you're focused doing the right things, if you're focused on the right things, if you know your enemy's capabilities, if you know how they communicate, I can be very effective in my intelligence collection. Now, I have to be on the ball because every day things change, but the point is, if we really were doing solid intelligence collection, we should know a whole bunch about how Iran operates. The problem is our political leaders don't want to know how Iran operates. They've bought into a fiction, and they have to keep this fiction. Nobody has the balls to go before the president and say everything you were told was a lie. Nobody has the balls to do that. Stand before the president and say everything you were told were a lie and everything you've done is based upon a lie and you have to fix it, Mr. President. There's not a single person in the U.S. intelligence community or policy community has the courage to tell the president that to his face. They'll be fired on the spot. They won't be allowed into the White House. And so we don't have people doing effective intelligence anymore because that intelligence is politically impossible to move up the chain. And so people like me who would be doing that are fired or relieved or reassigned. Counting ping pong balls in Alaska instead of, doing what they're supposed to do, because these assessments, you can't do a blockade of Iran with a good intelligence telling you that will never work. Nobody wants to hear that will never work. What they want to hear is, oh, this is a good idea. And they sell the fiction. Everything about how this war has been operated is based upon foundational lies, mistruths, miscalculations that are done deliberately to disguise the fact that the original assessment given to the president was bogus, was a lie. Nobody wants the truth right now. Nobody wants the truth. And as a result, look, the Iranians came loaded for bear to this Islamabad thing with the facts. I would have loved to have been able to sit down with the Iranians and go through those facts as a policy person and sit there and take their facts because, you know, I'm confident that I could get. Look, you and I have talked about this issue before about 60% enriched uranium and all that stuff. I would have the Iranians compelled to admit that that was a bad idea and they don't need the stuff and they're going to get rid of it. That's an easy discussion to have.
I think they said that. They're not going to.
Yeah, they've already acknowledged that. And they would acknowledge it again. But, you know, we have to come in with the enrichment's okay. You get to enrich the 3.5%, but because of the 60% issue, we have to shut down in, you know, perpetuity your ability to go to 60% again. That can't be allowed. That's not going to be allowed. We have to monitor against it and all that kind of stuff. In exchange, you know, you get all the sanctions lifted. You get all the
and it's a huge technical, you know, sort of negotiation. It's not 100%
about technical negotiation. Yeah. But it's doable. It's doable. But in order to do that, you have to stop the stupidity. On our side, when you allow Steve Witkoff and Jared Kushner to front, and they don't understand when Araghchi comes in and says, we got 490 pounds of this stuff or kilograms of this stuff, they go, he's threatening us with 10 nuclear weapons. No, what he was telling you is Iran hasn't further enriched. Iran hasn't done this, that it's all there, ready. It's there. It's ready to be turned over. That's what he was telling the United States. But our morons are sitting there going, no, you're threatening us with nuclear weapons. Iran's not threatening anybody with nuclear weapons. Iran is saying we have this capability. And this is what it is. This is the reality of it. But we're not ready to have that technical discussion. I don't think we have people capable of having that technical discussion because you have to empower them politically. And right now, nobody in Washington, D.C. wants to empower the truth. It's the same thing with the Strait of Hormuz. It's an easy problem to solve. It's a very simple problem to solve. And it's one in which I believe the Iranians, if you were politically responsible, I believe we could get Iran to agree to a 10-year window of tariff or tolls so that it's not permanent. So you're not threatening international law and the sea and all that stuff, but you recognize the inherent right of the need for security guarantees. Continued Iranian control over the Strait of Hormuz is a security guarantee that must be recognized as valid given the fact that the United States and Israel carried out an illegal war of aggression and a surprise attack. You can't expect Iran to give up its leverage. And the fact that the Gulf Arab states directly or indirectly supported this attack means that they too have to pay a price. But we can couch this in terms of, there's a mechanism that can come into play where it's about reconstruction, or something that there's a way to spin this so that Iran gets what it needs politically, but it's not sold as an American defeat, which is important, politically important. I know there's all the non-Americans are out there saying pound sand, we don't care. Well, you know what? Then you'll never get a solution to the problem, right? This isn't about the humiliation of the United States. This is about finding a good off-ramp that gets this war over so the people of Iran can operate free of economic sanctions, free of international constraint. They can finally get the economy they deserve and get the investments in their, this is all good for the people of Iran if this can happen. To happen, Trump has to be able to do this politically. Right now, I don't think the United States is capable of empowering the right people at this point, but we'll see, because it sounds like Trump is. There are technical people they're aware of everything you and I are just talking about right now, and I'm sure they have put forward working papers that have made their way to the president, and that's why he sounds optimistic about some big breakthrough come Thursday. We'll see, because this is Donald Trump, and you just never know what's going to happen. But I just think that Trump wants out of this war. I think he recognizes that mistakes have been made, but now it's a political question. How do you if there was no politics involved, this war would be over today. But because there's politics involved that are colored by an upcoming midterm election, which is all about the political legacy of Donald Trump, everything now has to go through a political filter, and it just complicates things so much.
Yeah. We had J.D. Vance participating in TPUSA, which was confronted by some people that are talking about you're supporting genocide. And J.D. Vance wants to, I think he wants to be 2028 presidential candidate for Republicans. How do you see the way that he was negotiating with Iranians? Because they said from the Iranian side, I talked with Professor Moran, they said right in the middle of the night, it was late in the night, he decided to go to the United States, which he agreed before to negotiations continuing to Sunday, but he decided to get out. What was that, Scott? What was that? And he was calling over and over Washington. He talked with Benjamin Netanyahu, and Benjamin Netanyahu says he was in direct contact with him because he wanted to report what has happened. What is that?
Well, it's a reality that in the Trump administration, there's no such thing as an independent negotiator. The only voice that counts is Donald Trump. This isn't Richard Nixon giving Henry Kissinger, permission to run off and solve problems, and then report back, and the president's briefed on it. Kissinger has great latitude. J.D. Vance had zero latitude to the fact that there was almost Islamabad memorandum of understanding is solely because of the Iranians, who came in prepared, very well prepared, and they were able to, take whatever limited American input there was and immediately turn it into something. They were ready to move. It's a shame that we blew that opportunity. But J.D. Vance wasn't there to, in my opinion, he wasn't there to make a deal. He was there to make it impossible for a deal to take place. The reason left at midnight is because the Iranians were doing everything they could to make a deal. The Iranians were ready. They're like, let's get this thing done. Here it is. You got a problem? Here's a solution. You got a problem? Here's a solution. We're ready to do what it takes to get this thing done. And Vance wasn't allowed to close the deal, so he had to leave. Because this can't be, if J.D. Vance closed the deal, if there was a successful negotiation, this could only be interpreted as an Iranian victory. That the United States met Iran in Islamabad, and at the end of the day, the Iranian 10 points served as the foundation of this this agreement. That's politically unacceptable. So what had to happen is we had to go in there, engage with the Iranians, and then declare the negotiations over because of Iranian intransigence, back out. Now that gives room for Donald Trump to go through the political theater of a blockade that is paid. And it allows him to declare victory, which he has done. And now he can go in and close the deal and say it only happened because of the great strength and resolution that I showed in showing the Iranians who's the boss of the Strait of Hormuz. But now we've solved that, so now we're going to have reconstruction. It's a great source of revenue, and however he wants to spin it. But J.D. Vance just wasn't allowed to succeed. I don't think some people say that's because Trump,
Yeah.
I think some people said it was about Trump trying to sabotage Vance. I don't think it's that. I just think that, it was about Trump making sure that at the end of the day, the failure of the negotiations couldn't be put on his table. It had to be put on somebody's table. And it leaves room for him to ride in and save the day, which I think you're going to see tomorrow. I think tomorrow is going to be an interesting day diplomatically.
Yeah, today we learned the Pakistani Army Chief Asim Munir. He has arrived in Tehran, with a senior political and security delegation. He's sending, he's giving the message from Washington to Iranians. Do you think that this time around, as you mentioned, Iranian were there, they went to Pakistan totally prepared. You see, you look at the delegation, they had everything there. They had an economy, legal, political, everything. They had everything there to do everything correctly. But how do you see if something happens with the negotiation, with the talk? Do you see the same happening on the part of the United States? We see a good delegations having each and every dimension that a delegation need to negotiate, to talk.
I don't know if we're capable of that anymore. I mean, I'd like to believe we could, but I don't know if we're capable of that anymore. What I see is that we were intellectually lazy. We let the Iranians do all the hard work. And that we'll use the Islamabad draft MOU as the foundation. It's been sent back and there's been some tinkering with it. I think, when we meet, we're going to use that document as the foundation. Look, I would love if we sent in a senior diplomat who was backed by, all the experts in the U.S. community coming together to do the same thing that the Iranians did. We don't have that kind of capability anymore. The State Department's been gutted. Donald Trump's approach to national security and foreign policy, formulation and implementation is to remove all the middlemen. So we don't have technical experts anymore. We don't have people that are singularly focused on this issue from a policy perspective. So I think the team we come in is going to be a politically motivated team there to save Donald Trump's presidency, and it's about spin. That Iran has done all the technical heavy lifting, and the United States is. I think we're just going to send another team of political spin meisters. Let's see. We'll see what it looks like. I think that the Pakistani defense minister was also because the Iranians were concerned the U.S. was going to shoot them down, that the U.S. was going to do something stupid. And I think the Pakistanis have to reassure the Iranians that it's not being set up for a U.S. trap.
That's so strange, publishing articles that this is an opportunity to kill Iranian negotiators. It's unbelievable. You have to be totally out of your mind to suggest that. The guy who wrote that article is nobody would believe any sort of negotiations if something of that sort happens. This is the Israeli sort of agenda, because they have been killing and assassinating the negotiator. The United States cannot be like this. I don't believe the United States is like this.
This administration is. This administration is unapologetic about everything. They're capable of anything. I mean, that's just where we are. This administration has modeled itself after the Israelis in terms of behavior. So I wish if we had this conversation 6 months ago, I would have said the same thing you did. That's not how America operates. I can't say that anymore. I mean, look, Donald Trump killed Qasem Soleimani. The American people still don't know the truth about that murder. This was a guy who was acting at the request of regional players to, create peace opportunities. He was on a mission of peace, of diplomacy. Which is why he traveled openly in the way that he did. And we murdered him as he was trying to, coordinate, nonviolent solutions to problems that previously had only been, sought to be solved violently. And we murdered the guy. Trump that murdered him. And so we are fully capable of doing Israeli type actions.
You mentioned, Scott, it seems that still in the mind of those people who are the main decision makers in the United States, in Israel, is that this government is an ideological government. They are radical, and nobody sees the pragmatic, sort of attitude of the government in Iran. I would say there is nothing radical with the government. If you know the people, if you talk to the people, if you see the way that they're seeing the conflict, the war, so far, look at this war, more than 40 days of the war. There is nothing radical about them, nothing ideological. They didn't attack civilians because in the first day, a primary school was attacked by by the fighter jets. They didn't go because they know what they want. They know what is practical for them. And they fail to understand it in the United States, in my opinion, and in Israel as well.
No, look, we're again, and we're dealing with people who are incapable of the truth, of embracing the truth. Why did the Iranian regime survive the assassination of Ali Khamenei? In the West, we think of it as a government of extreme theocrats. The Ayatollahs are in charge, but they're not. Iran's a constitutional republic. The president's in charge. Read the Constitution. The president has a lot of power. Even when you get into these various councils and committees, the president is the chair of these. He's the man that's sitting at the head of the table. Yes, the supreme leader is there, but the supreme leader is there from a religious standpoint, to focus on ensuring that policies conform, to the Islamic, foundation of the nation. But the Constitution drives everything. Even the Guardian Council and the Expediency Council are there to ensure, constitutional conformity. This is a system that's been in play for 5 decades, and it works. And the Iranian people, by and large, believe in it. There are abuses of power, of course there are, but for people to say this is a regime of mad radical ayatollahs means you don't know anything about Iran. You don't understand how Iran works. You don't understand how Iran functions. The total disrespect you show to the Majlis, and the whole concept of democracy, democratic representation, etc. And so, we can't allow people who truly know Iran to be advising the president, because the only way these policies work is if you believe the underlying misinformation about Iran and its system of government. But there's nothing radical about Iran. I think what we've done is we've empowered a more conservative element that is distrustful of the West, that might be more inclined to pivot away from the West and engage more fruitfully with the East. But even then, remember, the people that are talking about the pivot, it's not as though they're sold out to China and Russia. These are Iranian patriots. We don't respect the fact that the people that are governing Iran today are Iranian patriots first and foremost, that they're looking out for what's best for Iran, that one of the reasons why they've rejected, the policies of Rouhani and Zarif, is because the West has betrayed Iran so much over time. The West can't be trusted. And so they're starting to question those who believe we should give the West one more chance. To do what? to betray Iran again. So we in the West, we don't want to legitimize the legitimate concerns of these more conservative Iranians. So we radicalize them instead. We make anything that's opposition to the United States and the West becomes radicalized. And then we tend to, ignore the patriotic aspects of these people, and we call them Islamists, radical Islamists, fundamentalists, extremists, when the reality is most of them aren't extreme. I mean, none of them are extreme. I mean, I believe that Iran is a nation of great faith, and I believe that people who gravitate to positions of leadership, because it is an Islamic republic, are people whose beliefs conform with the vision of an Islamic republic, but that doesn't make them Islamists or fundamentalists or extremists in the way that we use those terms to define Wahhabism, Salafism, Al Qaeda, ISIS, and things of that nature. We in the West, we're incapable of discerning differences, or maybe we're capable of it. We just don't want to, because the truth is complex, and we want simplicity. And so we embrace lies. We embrace, inaccurate narratives because it's easier to do so. because we're not trying to win a debate about the reality of Iran with Iranians. It's not like, I don't have to convince you. I have to convince the idiot American across the street from me, and the idiot American down the road from me, and the idiot American down here, people who are ignorant about it. So the narrative I create doesn't have to be fact-based or, conform to reality. It just has to be something that can be consumed readily by an ignorant American public. That's got to be frustrating for you and the people of Iran who are saying, well, wait a minute, we really exist. There's a truth here. There's a reality here. Sadly, in America, we don't care about your truth or your reality. We only care about how we can spend data so they can be consumed politically here in the United States.
Part of the negotiations, Scott, since day one, Iran said on all fronts, there has to be, they have to put an end to the war on all fronts. One of them is with Hezbollah in Lebanon. And Israel had the first, direct talks with Lebanese government. But the outcome of that, it seems to be, they're gonna end up having a civil war in Lebanon if they go in that direction. What is your understanding of that?
My understanding is that Israel currently occupies 22% of Lebanon. So any Lebanese government that negotiates with the Israelis without recognizing that isn't a Lebanese government. They're an adjunct of Israel. And this is the fact. The Lebanese constitution, the vagaries of the French imposed system of guaranteeing the presidency to a Christian and the prime ministership to a Sunni Muslim. That means that there's no real democracy. It means that Lebanon is governed by factions, and the Christian faction and the Sunni faction, at least as they are represented in government, are factions that have sold out to Israel. They are controlled by Israel. So when we speak of Israel negotiating with the Lebanese government, it's Israel negotiating with itself. The Lebanese government's incapable of doing the notion that Hezbollah, which derives its legitimacy from the very concept of resistance to Israeli occupation, that Israel can't defeat Hezbollah, so they're turning to the Lebanese to say, you have to disarm Hezbollah. So the Lebanese army, instead of confronting the foreign entity that occupies 22% of their soil, is slaughtering their people, is now supposed to turn on Hezbollah? That isn't going to happen. The army won't obey those orders because the army understands what the consequences will be. The army cannot defeat Hezbollah in a stand-up fight. And if they try, it'll become a civil war. And when it becomes a civil war, suddenly the politics that constrain Hezbollah will no longer exist, and you'll see a different Hezbollah. Hezbollah is more powerful than the Lebanese army, and they're more powerful than the Israeli army when it comes to defending Lebanese soil. And Hezbollah will not be defeated. What we're seeing right now is just it's a game being played by the United States and Lebanon to create perceptions. How this will impact the final peace negotiations, I can't speak for the Iranians. I would never seek to speak for the Iranians, and I can't speak for the United States because I'm not in a position to do so. But I do believe that if I were an American negotiator, that I could prevail upon the Iranians to recognize the fact that the Israeli-Hezbollah conflict cannot be lumped into the current conflict between Israel and the United States and Iran. That these are two separate issues. That that doesn't mean we're going to give carte blanche to Israel to act, but we have to recognize the reality that we're not going to solve the Lebanese problem today, and therefore we must push it off under a different format. We can extend the ceasefire. We can seek a permanent cessation of hostilities between the United States and Iran, and extend the ceasefire, understanding that we can't guarantee outcomes here. I think that's a responsible way. First of all, that is a format that doesn't require Iran to stop funding Hezbollah, which Iran isn't going to do. So I think by treating those as separate, and the same thing with the Houthi. I mean, there's still the unresolved issues between the Houthi and Saudi Arabia that that conflict hasn't come to an end yet. And I still think that I could sit down with the Iranians and say we have to treat Yemen as a separate issue as well. We need to solve our fundamental problem. All right. But these issues are far more complex. They involve players that are outside the framework of our conflict. And, so we need to come up with an effective mechanism of continuing engagement to resolve these conflicts without, and I would tell the Iranians, without forestalling your ability to move forward. I want sanctions lifted against Iran. I would say that as an American negotiator. I want those sanctions lifted. We can't lift those sanctions if we're tying in Yemen and Lebanon, because now these problems aren't going to be solved overnight. If we're tying them in, that means this thing's going to drag out forever. We need to conclude our problems so that you can get sanctions lifted, so we can, move on with doing whatever we have to do in the region. And we need to agree that we're all going to come in. Now, maybe we can talk about frameworks. Maybe we can get Chinese mediators. Maybe we can do some things about this, to change the dynamic. Because if I were the Iranians, I'd say, well, so you're just proposing we continue to do what we did before that didn't work. It only led to Israeli attacks and American attacks on Yemen and Lebanon. So there would be, I think it would be wise to talk about bringing in, other parties to facilitate these negotiations, the Chinese, the Russians, et cetera, to de-emphasize the American. Well, I mean, how stupid of it is to have the United States, together Lebanon and Israel to negotiate the future of Hezbollah. I mean, it's just ridiculous framing. Anyways, that's it.
Hezbollah is not Hamas. Hezbollah is something beyond that. Everybody knows the role of Hezbollah in Lebanon.
Hezbollah defeated the Israelis in 2000. They fought the Israelis to a standstill in 2006, and they're beating the Israelis today. So, yeah, Hezbollah is Hezbollah. It's not going away anytime soon.
Scott, I think the war in the Middle East has somehow changed the whole calculations on the part of Russia, China, Europe, because, after the war in Ukraine, which was a total blow to European economy, they have been suffering a lot because of the war in Ukraine. And then the war in the Middle East came along. And you see how they are suffering as time goes by with this war in the Middle East from what is happening in the Strait of Hormuz, for example. And how do you see the way Donald Trump tried to put pressure on Saudi Arabia? This is the first time I've seen the foreign minister of Saudi Arabia says, no, we're going to decide about our policy. Our policy would be based on our calculation, not the calculation of the Trump administration. I have never seen Saudi Arabia talking this way. And how do you see the influence or the way that the influence that the war has had on calculation of GCC countries?
I mean, we have a study in contrasts. We have Saudi Arabia that appears to be more reality based, and saying, we get to make these decisions. Yeah, the United Arab Emirates was purely, a tool of the United States. I mean, they sent a senior delegation to China to try and put pressure on China to drop their support for Iran. And I've never seen more public humiliation in my entire life when the Chinese put the UAE delegation in its place. You don't tell the dragon what to do. The reality is that the world has changed, and the United States is no longer can no longer project itself as this this superpower, the last remaining superpower, unchecked guarantor of security, that nobody would dare challenge the United States because of our overwhelming military and economic strength. And now we have today the reality that Iran successfully stood up the United States militarily, and the United States hasn't broken them economically, that the world is a far more complicated, nuanced place with strengths having been accrued in China, Russia, and elsewhere that the United States can't overcome. The Gulf Arab nations, which had for now, 40 decades, bought into the Carter Doctrine, which was, America guarantees security, but then you guarantee your foreign policies will align with the United States. There There we go.
You're,
They're waking up to the
you're back.
fact that they're waking up to the fact that the United States no longer gets to dictate outcomes, and it can no longer provide guarantees. And so they have to adjust to this. Some adjust more rapidly than others. I think Saudi Arabia is starting to see the light, and the United Arab Emirates continues to wallow in its own ignorance.
Let's assume they get something with the negotiations between Iran and the United States. Is that going to be a new era of cooperation between the United States and other countries?
The United States is incapable of cooperating with other countries under Donald Trump. So I think you're going to see that this negotiation is the exception, not the rule. The only way the United States is going to come up with significant policy deviations that could be called, trending towards the normal is by defeat. If the United States isn't challenged, then we will continue to do what we've been doing, the path of least resistance, et cetera, under the belief that, America can get away with literally anything. But as we are challenged and as we fail, we have to adapt. And I think Iran is the first of what will probably be many adaptations that will take place over the course of the next several years. But this isn't the United States learning how to get along with its neighbors. It's the United States being compelled by the weight of their failures to readjust.
Yeah. Thank you so much, Scott, for being with us today. Great pleasure, as always.
Part of the world. Let me start by asking you, how are you? What is it life like in Tehran during this so-called ceasefire?
Well, thank you very much, Judge, for inviting me. It's always an honor being with you. The situation in Tehran is more normal. There's heavy traffic when you go out, and I made a couple of miscalculations because I was used to light traffic, and I almost missed an appointment on one occasion. So it's almost back to usual. It's not, the traffic isn't as heavy as it was. And of course, businesses are much slower, and but still, it looks more like what it was before the war. But people are quite aware that war could restart at any moment. We saw today that the Iranian armed forces stated that if the blockade carried out by Trump continues, Iran will block all shipping in the Red Sea, the Gulf of Oman, and the Persian Gulf. So people know that we could be going back to war. And at nights, people are on the streets. They continue to be on the streets across the country and in different parts of Tehran. Last night, when I went out to a studio to do an interview, on the way there, in multiple places, there were large crowds that had gathered, waving the flag and chanting slogans and in defense of the armed forces, the leaders, and in condemning the United States under Trump.
What kind of damage did Tehran sustain now that you're able to view it? Roads, bridges, hospitals, police stations, commercial areas, residential areas?
Well, there has been substantial damage. Apartment blocks have been destroyed. Hospitals have been badly damaged. Banks have been damaged. Actually, not far from here, a bank was destroyed, and the apartment buildings above it as well. Excuse me. But Tehran is a huge city. So if you drive around the city without knowing where the attacks, the airstrikes, the missile strikes took place, you probably you probably wouldn't see anything, or you may rarely see a place that has been wrecked. But there is there is damage. But since it's a big city, you don't see it easily. So in my neighborhood, there's only one building that's like a 20-minute walk away from here, which was badly damaged. But other than that, there's nothing visible as you drive around or walk around near where I am.
All right, so the electricity obviously works since you're communicating to us live right now. I assume water works. Do the police do their job? Does sanitation do its job? Are children going to school? Are universities open?
Well, schools are not open, they're online. And the same is true with university, because we could be back at war at any time. We are, after all, in a ceasefire. But other than that, yes, we have electricity 24 hours a day. We have water 24 hours a day. And we never actually had any problems during the war either. On day one, when they bombed the school, the elementary school, and killed all those children and murdered the leader and carried out other attacks, there was no run on gas stations or in supermarkets or anything like that. And so right now, obviously, when it didn't happen back then, it's not going to happen now. So everything is normal. But of course, inflation is up, and some businesses are struggling, I'm sure, because of the lower demand under the circumstances. But again, if you walk around in Tehran, if you drive around, everything looks normal, but obviously life is more difficult, I'm sure.
Okay. What is your take? What is the Iranian take on what happened in Islamabad over the weekend?
Well, on our way there at the airport, on the plane, and in the hotel in Islamabad, when I spoke to different members of the delegation and a couple of the negotiators, there was a great deal of skepticism anyway. They never expected any breakthrough because of our past experiences. Before the 12-day war, we were negotiating, and then Trump secretly was conspiring against Iran with Netanyahu to launch a war. Before this war, the same thing happened. So no one here believed, no one on the delegation believed that there was any there was a good chance of an agreement. But the Iranians were willing to give it a try because obviously Trump is under pressure. The shortages of oil and LNG and fertilizer and petrochemicals and helium are obviously taking a toll, and things are going to get much worse soon. So they went to see if Trump is prepared to shift, especially since he agreed on the Iranian framework, the 10-point Iranian plan. True, later on, the White House spokesman said they threw it in the bin, but he did agree to it. Initially, at the beginning of the war, he said unconditional surrender. And after 40 days, he reached the stage where he said he'll accept this as the framework for negotiation. So Iran went there to see if he is looking for an off-ramp, or if he's capable of looking for an off-ramp, but also tell the international community that we're here, we're prepared to negotiate. The problem is not on our side. And then that's basically what happened. During the negotiations, the Iranian team did not call Tehran. They had full authority. Dr. Ghalibaf spoke with the leader, Ayatollah Sayyid Mujtaba Khamenei, extensively. He knew the framework of what was to be negotiated. But the other side was not prepared. On the one hand, Vance was surrounded by 2 Israeli firsters, but also he was constantly making phone calls. And one of those people who he was calling was Netanyahu. And Netanyahu himself said Vance reports to him, which is quite stunning for a tiny colony the prime minister of a tiny colony to be saying that the vice president of the United States reports to him. But I think that's where the root of the problem lies. Netanyahu wrecked, and the Zionists wrecked the negotiations, just like they wrecked the ceasefire, because we had a deal with the United States, which included Lebanon. The Pakistani prime minister stressed this point, and then Trump said no, and that again was because of Netanyahu. And since Netanyahu is continuing with his genocidal attacks on Lebanon, Iran decided not to allow those extra number of ships to pass through the Strait of Hormuz during the last few days. So what Netanyahu did by violating the ceasefire and forcing Trump to violate it, and also by wrecking the negotiations, he's made the global economy suffer worse. And I think the coming recession and depression are going to hit faster and worse as a result.
You were in Islamabad with the Iranian delegation, correct?
That's right.
And tell us about the atmosphere. I mean, did Vice President Vance sit across a table from either Foreign Minister Arachi or the Speaker of the Iranian Parliament? And did they speak face to face, either in English or Farsi or both with translators?
There were translators. There was also the Pakistani mediators. On one side was Vance and Kushner and Witkoff, and on the other side it was Dr. Ghalibaf, the Speaker of Parliament, who's also a colleague of mine at the University of Tehran. He's an associate professor. Dr.
That's the sound of an American oil company hard at work. Want to be a part of it? Listen up.
Hello, the Foreign Minister Arachi, and also Dr. Bagheri, who is another academic, and he is the deputy head of the Supreme National Security Council. He was the person who negotiated 4 years ago the nuclear program in Vienna.
How did the Iranians even permit the two Israeli agents who had duped them in June and in February to even be in the room?
I don't believe that the Iranians were duped. I think back then, I think that's a myth, really. The Iranians knew that before the 12-day war, that the Israeli regime and the Americans were going to strike. But just like this time around, they wanted the international community and ordinary Iranians to know that they tried. Of course, Iran didn't know when they're going to strike or how they're going to strike, and they miscalculated probably about who they're going to strike, and that's why so many generals were murdered during the first day of the 12-day war. But the Iranians knew there was going to be an attack. But again, they wanted everyone to know that Iran was not, because if Iran had not negotiated, one of the narratives that the United States under Trump would have put out, and of course, even Trump's opponents, because the empire, the different factions, they have the same policy towards the empire. They would have all said, well, if Iran had only negotiated, this may not have happened. So Iran wants to make sure they have no excuse. And then for this war, the same was true. So Iran wasn't duped, but Iran wanted to make sure that people saw that Iran was at the table. But also Iran wanted to provide a potential off-ramp to Trump, but Trump is unwilling or incapable of taking an off-ramp.
Were offers exchanged back and forth? I mean, did they discuss issues like nuclear enrichment, Iran ballistic missiles, the Strait of Hormuz?
I don't think that the Iranian missiles were discussed, but the nuclear program, the Strait of Hormuz, and other things were discussed. The interesting thing was that despite Iranian skepticism, during let's say the first half or more than half of the negotiations during the day, some progress was made. There were arguments and disagreements, but progress was made. But near the end of the first day, suddenly the United States took a very hard position and their behavior changed, and it was reaching a dead end. And then they were supposed to have further negotiations the same day, but Vance, as we all saw, went and gave out a statement and left. He implied that Iran insisted on making nuclear weapons, which is, of course, not true. Again, Joe Kent's resignation letter clearly indicates that Iran was not and is not pursuing nuclear weapons. This is just an excuse to justify their behavior. And then he said Iran didn't accept our demands. Well, of course, Iran won't accept demands because the United States didn't win the war in order for it to be able to impose its demands. The negotiating table is to find solutions, not to dictate terms. And the Iranians feel that they won the war, they and their allies, and that Vance should have been serious, but he wasn't. But the Iranians believe that Vance did not have the authority. The fact that he constantly had to make phone calls, whereas the Iranians didn't have to do so, showed that he was not the person who had the authority to be able to make decisions. And obviously, his phone calls were preventing him from making any real productive decisions.
The Western press, Mohammed, has reported that the United States demanded no nuclear enrichment that Iran not engage in nuclear enrichment, which, as you and I know, they have a legal right to, but this is what the U.S. demanded for 20 years, and Iran offered 5 years, and it sort of stopped at that. Is that your understanding? U.S. demanded no enrichment for 20 years, Iran agreed no enrichment for 5, and it never got any farther?
Well, the disagreements covered different areas. It wasn't just nuclear enrichment. And we have to remember that the Americans accepted the Iranian framework for negotiations. And that for Iran is key. And one of the things for Iran is that Iran will not accept is ending enrichment. Iran will not accept ending enrichment. It is willing to compromise and to give assurances that its nuclear program, even though Joe Kent's statement reveals that this really never was an issue, it's just an excuse. But just like in the JCPOA, Iran is willing to put a cap on enrichment for a period of time, but it's not willing to give up its sovereignty. That's just not going to happen. The Islamic Revolution was about sovereignty. It was about independence. It was about dignity. And so the expectations of Trump and his colleagues are unrealistic. And I think it's basically because they're being either forced by Zionists to make these foolish demands, or they believe the fake intelligence or information or analyses that these Zionists are giving to them, and they think that if they try to bully Iran, that Iran will capitulate. But they can't get at anything at the negotiating table that they couldn't get on the battlefield. Judge, there's a good book that I said this elsewhere too, a very good book called Going to Tehran, written by 2 former White House officials, Flint and Hillary Mann Leverett. And in the book Going to Tehran, they deal about a lot of the myths that exist in the United States, in the Western media and in Western think tanks about Iran. But they also say that they also explain why the United States has to move towards rapprochement. If American officials, instead of attacking these 2 authors, because they were hammered by the Democrats and the Republicans, all the think tankers, if they had taken these people, if they read the book and listened to these 2 very knowledgeable people who worked under Condoleezza Rice in the White House, if they had listened to them, we wouldn't be where we are today, and the world wouldn't be rushing towards the cliff which is going to lead us to a global economic depression. The United States, by listening to the Zionists, it's being misled, it's going down the wrong path, and it's definitely not going to get its way with Iran.
What is the status of the Strait of Hormuz as we speak? Who controls it? What's going in? What's going out? Are the Iranians still collecting a toll? Are the Americans stopping ships that Trump wants stopped? What's your understanding? Because we can't seem to get a straight answer on that from the press here in the West.
So if you have 50K or more in digital assets, do not buy Bitcoin. Is that what you're saying?
Yeah, so the masses will tell you to buy all the mainstream coins like Bitcoin, XRP, Solana, Ethereum, Cardano. But what nobody is telling you is that there are actually 2 digital asset markets. And the second market might just be holding the next Bitcoin for just 50 cents.
50 cents. Okay, I want to hear more.
Okay, so on one side, you have the mainstream exchanges. Coinbase, Robinhood, Kraken. That's where all the investors go to buy digital assets after they have already exploded in value.
So they're buying at the top, basically.
Exactly. But there's another market that most people don't know exist, the native markets, where digital assets trade before they hit the mainstream exchanges. This is where Solana traded for $1.50 before hitting $260 on Coinbase, where Chainlink traded for 20 cents. It went up to $50 on Coinbase.
So the smart money is getting in first.
Exactly. On the native markets. That's where every digital asset millionaire got in first for pennies on the dollar, while everyone else is buying the top on Coinbase, as per usual.
And you're saying this is happening right now?
Right now, we've identified multiple coins that could be the next XRP, trading in these hidden markets for just 50 cents. The same pattern, the same setup, the same opportunity to get in before the masses even know it exists.
So what would you recommend our listeners do? Go and buy on the native markets?
Well, why don't I show you live on this podcast how to buy on the native markets, how to buy a 10x potential gem. I'm going to show you live.
Okay, guys, we've literally recorded a free podcast episode that shows you how to access these markets live. All you have to do is click below and you'll see a 120-second demo on how to access the native markets. Tan doesn't hold anything back. He actually buys a gem that he thinks could 10x live in front of us. If you can't watch it right now, then at least bookmark the link and save it for later. But I guarantee this will be one of the most valuable podcasts you have ever listened to. I'd recommend you click the link now because you might not ever see this ad again.
Well, not much is getting through the Strait of Hormuz, obviously, because on the one hand, the Iranians have imposed major limitations, and on the other hand, so have the Americans. So in an odd way, the Iranians and the Americans are cooperating to keep it shut. But that is not going to help the United States. It's only going to make the global economic crisis worse faster than before. But also the Iranians have said just hours ago, as I said at the beginning of the program, the Iranian military has announced that if the United States does not lift the blockade, Iran will block all shipping in the Red Sea, in the Gulf of Oman, and in the Persian Gulf. And that, I think, is going to be a major, major move by the Iranians. And obviously, Iran is going to do it with missiles and drones. So ships that go through when the Iranians make the decision, ships that go through the Red Sea will be struck by Iranian missiles or possibly drones. And the same would be true in the Sea of Oman. And that will drastically make things worse. And again, it will push us much more swiftly towards global economic catastrophe.
What happens if a Chinese tanker tries to get through? Is the U.S. Navy going to board it and stop it?
I don't know, Judge, but one of the things that is happening is that the entire world is seeing that this looming economic catastrophe is being imposed upon them by the President of the United States and the Prime Minister of the Israeli regime and the Zionist lobby, and they're going to take the blame. They're going to have to take the blame. It's going to isolate the United States, and by threatening countries across the world and warning them that they're not allowed to do business and trade and their economies will have to suffer as a result, it's not going to do the United States any good. It's going to make things, it's not going to do the Israeli regime any good, which is they're now despised across the world for the genocide in Gaza, and now the ongoing genocide in Lebanon is truly horrific what they're doing in Lebanon, just like what they do in Gaza, targeting medics, bombing apartment blocks. Western media tries to hide this by saying they're bombing, Hezbollah strongholds and Hezbollah targets. They know they're dishonest. They're journalists in Beirut. A couple of them, when I argued with them, they said, I didn't write this, our editors did, but that's no justification. They're complicit in these atrocities by allowing people to be misled that these are military targets. They are flattening apartment buildings and slaughtering people inside across the country. But
right.
But in any case, people have already coming to despise the regime. And now people across the world, even like in India, which under Modi has been close to the Israeli regime, they're suffering as a result of policies by Netanyahu. So I don't think that this policy and the attempt to bully China, among others, is going to do the United States any good.
Let's get back to Hormuz. Are any ships getting through that Iran wants to get through?
Well, until yesterday, all of the Iranian ships were going through. And I think there was a rush during the final few hours to get as much out as possible. So it's not really something that's currently concerning to Iran. But again, if this goes on, the Iranian military has said that they're going to shut down the Red Sea. One thing that I should point out, which both shows that we're approaching a global economic crisis very rapidly, but also it shows how strong Iran's hand is that for the last few months, since the U.S. has been building up forces and the price of oil and energy has been going up, Iran's sales have gone up. And then during the past 40 some days, Iran has been selling unprecedented amounts of oil and making a lot of money. But also Iran had around 200 million barrels of oil in tankers on the seas. Half of that has been sold. And the other half, the other 100 million, will be sold in the coming days. But the big issue is that the oil on the seas is running out. So we are really swiftly approaching a cliff. But Trump thinks that by manipulating the markets and making statements every now and then, he can keep the prices down. He can do that for a while, but the reality is that pretty soon things are going to get much worse. What we're seeing right now is just the tip of the iceberg.
Well, how did the Iranians feel when American troops were on the ground near Isfahan trying to steal Iranian enriched uranium?
They were confident that they would fail. The Iranians had already been prepared for the Americans, and they're prepared for any escalation in the Persian Gulf. And time is really not on the side of the Americans, Judge. You know this region well. In a few weeks, it's going to get very warm and humid in the Persian Gulf and the Arabian Peninsula with sandstorms. And U.S. assets are not well protected because they were rushed in very suddenly. It was supposed to be a 2-day war. So this is, time is not on the side of those who want to carry out aggression. And right now, as we speak, the Iranians are preparing themselves for the next phase of the war. It's not as if the Iranians are on vacation. The military is working 24 hours a day to prepare itself for the next phase. And I think if the Iranians begin striking ships in the Red Sea, that will be an entirely new phase of this war.
So the American media, one of them is reporting as follows. It's been more than, this is ridiculous, but I'll read it. It's been more than 45 days since Iran's internet went dark, and the Iranian regime is burning through millions in caps per day to keep 92 million people offline. Yet here we are, you in Tehran, electricity working, internet working, and we're having a conversation as if we were sitting in a cafe with each other.
Well, what they say is not entirely untrue. During the war, there was a strict, people in Iran had access to the internet, but only for Iranian websites and Iranian social media and Iranian apps for security reasons, because they didn't want images of places that were bombed to be sent out, and also cameras were being used hacked and used, and Western intelligence agencies were hacking systems in order to wage war against Iran and to use Iran's own. But are having internet business people for their needs. I initially I had to go to a studio, but now I do have access to the internet from home. But I think it is gradually going to open up unless there is another war. And if that happens, I guess it's going to shut down. This is an issue about security. It's not about freedom. Iranians, first of all, many people at home, most people at home have satellite dishes. They get all the Persian language propaganda channels that the West funds, and they get that information. People in Iran know what's going on, and millions are on the streets. So, and before the war, they had the internet. But one thing that I'd like to add about Western media, and that is that when we were, and how the Western media likes to demonize the regime, as they call it, the Washington Post, when we were, I think, either on our way to Pakistan or when we'd arrived, it put out an opinion piece where it said the United States should assassinate, and probably the Israelis should assassinate the negotiators. And now we see a sort of competition in carrying out crimes against humanity between the Fifth Estate and the political establishment, or the regime, the Trump regime itself. In Pakistan, we felt threatened, and the delegation believed that on the way back to Iran, there was a very good chance of the plane being hit by a missile. Of course, everyone boarded the plane. No one asked to stay in Pakistan. The plane came and landed in Mashhad instead of going to Tehran, they landed near the border between Afghanistan and Turkmenistan. And then we came to Tehran by land, about a 1,000-kilometer drive. I came by train. But the point is that this is what the Western media is. They're all controlled by the oligarchy, the Epstein class, the Zionists, the powerful Zionists. So whatever they say about Iran is propaganda from my perspective. And that's why I think people should read that book, Going to Tehran, because it does bust many of the myths. And these two experts, who are both academics who've been to top universities and who had important jobs in the White House and elsewhere, I think their book is a very good read, and would be very valuable to people who want to understand the real nature of the relationship between Iran and the United States.
You have been very valuable to us, Mohammed, my dear friend. Thank you for your intellectual honesty and your personal courage. Thank you for being our eyes and ears. Be safe, be well, my dear friend. We'll talk to you again soon.
Thank you, Judge. You are valuable to the entire world, and I'm very grateful to you, and God be with you.
Thank you. God be with you as well. A great man and a most eye-opening conversation. Coming up later today at 1 o'clock this afternoon, Pepe Escobar. At 2:15 this afternoon, Professor Glenn Deason. At 3 o'clock.
On the program. Ceasefire, and it tends to be brought into the conversation by spokespeople in the White House, even at the same time as they're saying we're abiding by the ceasefire. So it's unclear what the ceasefire means, but at least they're not shooting at them, it appears.
Right.
But what is the likely success of this blockade? Because from what I understand, they have to keep a fairly safe distance, and the waterway is not narrow when you go this far down south.
Yeah. So uh, this is all, it's like a Japanese kabuki theater. It's very stylized, very scripted. Um, the U.S. has a version of what's going on. They are stopping every ship. There's not a ship getting out. Boy, they've got it locked down tight. Meanwhile, the other reports indicate that ships are that Iran's allowing ships to leave, and those ships are not being stopped. Uh, the people that are in a position to know what's actually going on described it as one described it. He says it's like a security guard at a mall. you know, yeah, he's got a uniform but no real authority to do much, and not terribly effective. Um, so this could potentially heat up, but as you noted in your introduction, there is a Iran uh, has the potential. They've got coastal defense cruise missiles. They've got close range ballistic missiles, and they have a variety of drones, both underwater and on water and in the air, sort of three dimensions that they can use against any ship, any U.S. ship that gets within, say, 200 miles of the coast. So the Abraham Lincoln, for example, in March, it had gotten within 220 miles of the coast, and it got attacked and suffered damage that even Donald Trump later admitted. Yeah, they'd been attacked from 17. He said 17 sides. Um, so um, right now, it appears that Chinese vessels carrying oil for China have left the strait and are making their way to China and have not been stopped. Now, this could all change, but if the U.S. You need to do a proper interdiction on these ships, you need helicopters. Destroyers, they can come up and threaten to shoot you, but they're not going to carry that job out. And once it's putting, even if you had an aircraft carrier and the two Marine, they look like small aircraft carriers. They carry lots of helicopters. They can only cover a limited area, and it's stretching air assets. It really is putting a strain on U.S. air assets, is what I'm hearing. That both the maintenance costs, the stress, the time up in the air, and then it's not easy to figure out where ships are. These oceans are big, and the ships don't have. There's not an easy automatic way to track it. I mean, I learned that the hard way over, in working with the Joint Special Operations Command over 23 years. And when we would do exercises, some that were maritime, unless you put a transponder on a ship and it sends out a beacon like friend or foe, then fine, you might be able to track it. But otherwise, there's no way to know. You can you can see something on radar, but it doesn't necessarily tell you what it is. So and then we get to what's the purpose of the blockade, and this is where the Trump administration's all over the board. Early on, they immediately lifted sanctions on Russia and Iran. Why? Because they wanted the supply of oil, keep the supply of oil up. But now this week, they've reimposed sanctions on Russian oil, and they're trying to shut down the flow of Iranian oil. And they've already lost 20% of the world's supply. And yet the oil markets are acting like, oh boy, we're going to have happy days are here again. Prices are going down on the oil futures, but the actual price people are paying where the ships finally dock is like 140 to, I've seen one price as high as $210 a barrel for Singapore. So the economic gut punch that's coming from this, the West they got their eyes closed, and what compounds this is the literal craziness of Donald Trump. He is out of touch with reality. He doesn't remember from one day to the next what it is that he has said. He says things that he believes sincerely are true that just are not true, such as Iran's begging for negotiations. No, they're not at all. We're the ones begging for those negotiations. Iran can live without it. And Trump is he's emotionally volatile, yelling at people, getting angry. And so the best description I've heard of it is it's like kids living with an alcoholic, abusive father.
For the first time in modern history, college student
Don't wake dad up, tiptoe quietly, don't do anything to get the old man angry because he's going to start punching you or beating you. That's how they're treating Donald Trump right now, which is frightening. So there is a lot going on behind the scenes that this is not some great 5D chess game that that Trump's maneuvering and trying to accomplish this objective or the other. No, man, he's making it up as he goes along piece by piece. And the only one that has been firm about this is a bad decision, this is wrong, has been J.D. Vance, and Trump's gone out of his way to humiliate and isolate J.D. Vance.
And well, I often wonder when I see these tweets that today he tweeted out that China is very happy that I'm opening the Strait of Hormuz. I'm doing it for them, for the Chinese. At the same, and at the same time putting a blockade on Iranian ports, in which 90% of the oil goes to China.
Yeah.
And at the same time, that same day, Scott Bessent comes out and say that, well, we're going to sanction probably 2 Chinese banks at least for buying Iranian oil because Iran is a sponsor of terrorism. That's the argument. So, and at the same time, the U.S. is opening the Strait of Hormuz for China. I mean, I don't know who the audience is for this, though. I mean, the Chinese are not sitting there going, "Oh, well, wonderful, how kind." I mean, is it for the MAGA cult? I mean, it's hard to see who this is for. But with the naval blockade, as you said, it requires a lot of naval assets which are being overstretched. But with more assets in the region, they have to dock somewhere for maintenance. A lot of the logistics, it appears, have taken some damage and hits. To what extent do you think this makes the U.S. more exposed, though?
Oh, it's unsustainable. And, we're winning, we're in control. Then why is the George H.W. Bush carrier sailing along the west coast of Africa to get to the Persian Gulf region? Why didn't it take the shortcut and come through the Med, down the Suez Canal, and then through the Red Sea? Because they're scared to death that they'd get sunk by the Houthis. Scared to death. That's the reality. And you bring up the excellent point about where are they going to get the maintenance and service for these ships, if nothing else, to be refueled, refitted. That's Diego Garcia is really the closest base. The United States has got itself in an unsustainable military operation. And so what's going on is Trump's pronouncements. Everything is being done for the American audience. Just to give us, hey, things are cool, things are all right, don't worry, it's all great. But the reality of what's actually unfolding out there is something else. And meanwhile, like they're attacking China, yet we've seen in this week, end of last week and into this week, China and Russia have stepped up their activities in trying to broker a peace, working with the Saudis, working with the Emiratis, working with the Iranians. Russia approached Turkey. The Turkish foreign minister signed on board. Yeah, we'll do that. So there's actually work around the United States. Ignore the United States as not being relevant any longer. But to conduct these air assets that are required and the naval assets required to try to do an interdiction, it's going to get stressed out. And if to be the most effective at it, they've got to be close into the Iranian shore. But the closer they get, then the more vulnerable they are that if this war kicks off and goes hot again. Right now we have a ceasefire that's in effect until Monday. Pakistan is undertaking significant efforts right now to try to get the negotiations back on. J.D. Vance, I've learned, he was the one that had agreed to the Iran's 10-point peace plan, or 10-point plan for negotiations, restarting negotiations. Trump then, under pressure from all of his Zionist donors, then backed away and said, we didn't accept any of that. There were actually making some progress until Vance was basically told, shut up and come home, stop talking.
What if you could claim a stake on what's set to be the biggest IPO ever, starting with just $500? Everybody's talking about Elon Musk's SpaceX IPO. It's all over the headlines. Forbes, Wall Street Journal, Bloomberg, CNBC called it the big market event of 2026, and the New York Times predicted that this IPO is going to unleash gushers of cash for Silicon Valley and Wall Street. So what is it that's so special about this IPO? Well, according to former tech executive and investing legend Jeff Brown, it's actually not about launching rockets to Mars or satellite internet or anything you've probably heard from the media. It's actually much bigger than that, because this IPO is actually a key part of Elon Musk's secret AI master plan, a plan that's set to unlock the full power.
But now the realization about the economic effects, the negative effects on the U.S. economy and the global economy, it's starting to hit home. God, the more I watch this Scott Bessent, the more I dislike the man. I mean, he just, you want to just go and punch him in the face. He's such a Weasley, oily character. They tried to pretend that things are great, and things are not great. It's anecdotal, but one of my neighbors is a rancher, so he's got a ranch 20 miles outside of where we live. But he was commenting that he's had to pay, the price of diesel is up over $2 a gallon. So, that's adding almost 40% to his fuel costs. Fertilizer is triple the cost. And then on top of it, he needs to buy, we've had a drought in Florida. And so the hay, the grass that normally would feed cattle hasn't grown. So he's had to purchase hay, or trying to purchase hay. He says it's very difficult to come by right now. He said last year he bought 40 bales of hay, $40 a barrel per bale. So that's you get it's now $90. So it's more than doubled in price. And he, instead of 40 bales, he needs 90. So he's now up to $3,600 as opposed to $1,600. So again, almost more than double the price. And he says, I'm in the red. That's happening to farmers and ranchers across the United States and around the world. So what we're looking at here is the beginnings of what's going to be a collapse of the global food system, potentially. I mean, it could get that serious. So this is very, the Trump administration is a bit like Nero fiddling away while Rome is burning. They've not putting out the fire, and instead the policy moves are, as you pointed out, they're completely contradictory. 1 minute, oh, we don't need who cares about the Strait of Hormuz? We don't need it, said Trump. And then the next minute he's demanding in the most foul language possible that Iran open the strait. And then he's complaining that Europeans aren't pitching in to help. Then he turns around and he blockades it so nothing gets out.
If you're not making $158,000 per year, but you'd like to, I strongly.
And now he's saying, oh, yeah, we're helping China. China loves us for what we're doing because we're stopping the flow of oil to China. I mean, it's all over. It's a complete scatterbrained approach. And the only thing that explains it, it's not 5D chess, man. This is a mental illness.
Well, that's why it just looks like this shock to the system is difficult to absorb, especially now. I mean, if it happened, like 2-3 decades ago, maybe it would have been easier. But we now have all this just-in-time logistics where we don't rely on warehouses, so everything has to run smoothly in order to reduce logistics cost. So that can't absorb much shock. You have people where you have record numbers living paycheck to paycheck, or severely in debt. So if you suddenly have a slight increase in food prices or energy, it's very difficult to absorb it. Now we're going to have this massive energy shock where the prices double. We have a massive food shortage coming up. Prices are spiking. I mean, you can see how the problems will just start to spread through the entire system. And I would like to make predictions, but because it's so all-encompassing, it's gonna affect everything. So it's quite dramatic. I mean, such a massive shock to the system. I don't think they know what's coming down the road. Well, I guess we shouldn't listen too much to what Trump is saying as opposed to what he's doing. But he did say, that this war will soon be over. Of course, he's been overly optimistic since day one. But do you think he's expecting a defeat of Iran? Because I see a lot of U.S. military hardware being moved into the region. Or do you think his desperation is kicking in, so they need to find an out?
Well, it's more about creating a narrative that he thinks will sell, that sounds good on Fox News. He literally he confines himself to watching Fox, reading the New York Times, and not doing much else beyond that. So he's got really a narrow information flow, and up until about 2 or 3 weeks ago, he wasn't getting the bad news. He was not, because if he'd get bad news, he'd fly into a rage and blame the person that was delivering the news. This is Shakespearean. I mean, this is a modern version of King Lear that has gone mad, and no one's come up with a fix. What do we do with this guy? He should actually be removed from office, receive medical care. Being one of those care facilities for people with dementia, but instead he's allowed to still be in charge of this country and to make decisions, irrational decisions at that. To think that it was a good idea to send out a picture of himself as Jesus and healing the sick, and then he turns around to say, "Oh, I was a doctor. What are you talking about?" And there's growing concern within the White House, I'm told. And I'm told by somebody who's in a position to know. So this is worse than the Biden situation. Biden, could fly off the handle too, but he was relatively harmless. Trump is not. Trump has a viciousness to him, and he's lost all empathy. And so this, right now with the information that's coming out about the so-called blockade, it appears that the Navy is deliberately lying to him, telling him what he wants to hear. Meanwhile, there are efforts underway to restart the talks and to use the whole nuclear issue as the way to get out of this. J.D. Vance wants to exit the war, and the way you exit it is basically you resurrect JCPOA. You don't call it that, but that's what it is. It would be on-site inspections by IAEA, continued support of the Non-Proliferation Treaty by Iran, But instead of a 10-year time, an agreement that lasts 10 years, this will be a forever agreement. That'll be Trump's. That's why he'll be able to say it's a much better agreement than what they had before, because now he's got a permanent, forever agreement, and Israel's safe. There are also reports out today that there's going to be a ceasefire between Israel and Hezbollah. And that, again, that goes back to one of the demands that Iran made. So if they pull that off, the problem is Trump is very much being driven around by Bibi Netanyahu. So even though Vice President Vance may be given the green light to do certain things, he doesn't have the ultimate authority here. And Trump's decisions are very mercurial. One day he's in favor of it, and the next day he's opposed to it.
I saw him give an interview where he was arguing, we could have, we could have this war over with soon. We can get a deal which makes sure Iran doesn't get a nuclear weapon. And, this gives me some optimism because this sounds like an out. I mean, if this was the goal, Iran not to have a nuclear weapon, they could have kept the JCPOA. They could have easily got another agreement, something with, commitments plus transparency, something they can verify. But it's the fact that it was first linked up to these other issues that is on limiting its ballistic missile program or decoupling from its regional partners. All these things were also had to capitulate its conventional deterrence. So I thought, this could be a sign of optimism. On the other hand, I always blame myself when I listen too much to what Trump is actually saying. It's more interesting to see what he's actually doing. But otherwise, he's pushing a narrative, though, the victory narrative. And he always refers to how many leaders he's killed, the infrastructure destroyed, the military targeting, which has been diminished. How do you see this, though? Because does he genuinely, is this a selling point, or do you think he genuinely believes that a lot of killing equals victory? Because I thought, the forever wars in the Middle East, the one thing they proved is the US can have all these tactical victories, but it doesn't win.
Right.
I mean, it's, or do you think he's not appreciating this, or is it again, he's just selling a war?
Well, he's telling what he's being told, or he's repeating what he's being told. And so the Pentagon had through Hegseth, they're basically lying to him. They're not giving him the true picture of what this conflict actually is. So they get the tout, oh, we've blown up this and we've blown up that. Meanwhile, they're not reporting the Iran has rapidly rebuilt, repaired several of the sites that we thought we, quote, had destroyed for 20 years that are now back in operation. And what I am hearing is within military circles, the planners, they are extremely concerned about new weaponry that China has introduced. Now, they're out saying, oh, China's promised Trump that they're not introducing weapons. Well, I'm not sure that China's even said that to Trump, but even if they said it, they're not doing it. They're doing the exact opposite. So there is real concern that that there has been a significant upgrade in the air defense system on the part of, with the assistance of China, that F-35s, all the fourth generation fighters that the United States has flown into the region, that they will be vulnerable and will likely be shot down, at least some.
Yeah, I've seen some reports of Chinese aircrafts delivering unknown material in Iran. I'm assuming that these are weapons. And well, I didn't take the Trump's comments that serious about China's promise, because it looks like Trump and the Chinese essentially want the same thing. Trump needs headlines which suggest that the Chinese, respect his authority, that they wouldn't dare to send weapons, and the Chinese are also happy with the headlines that they're not supplying weapons. So it seems like they both win. But of course, I do think the Chinese are supplying. But what is the likelihood, do you think, though, that there could be well, if the ceasefire is extended, or if there's not a peace agreement, or if there's an actual peace agreement. Because I always thought that the main challenge for Trump is, on one hand, he would like an out, but what the Iranians demand as an out, it essentially prevents. Well, it's too big of a price to pay, too humiliating defeat, especially after making all these victory laps claiming to have won.
Yeah. Well, he'll be able. Look, I think if he can build the narrative and avoid the humiliation by simply selling the story that, hey, I have got a permanent end, forever and ever, Iran will never have a nuclear weapon. He can sell that, and then excuse the lifting of sanctions as and we're going to make fulfill our promise that Iran's going to become a great economic power. The other component of this, though, is what happens with the war between Lebanon, Hezbollah, and Israel. So, I think Israel has suffered enough damage in that war that they're also looking for a way out. So if they can get some sort of new ceasefire agreement in place with Hezbollah, I think they'll take it. Still doesn't solve the Gaza question, but there are sort of other pressures here. Is that Jared Kushner and Steve Witkoff and their associates, they've got significant investments in the Gulf, particularly in the United Arab Emirates, and they're at risk of losing that money. So that's the other incentive to try to get a negotiated end to this as quickly as possible, so they can try to salvage their investments in those countries. I don't think UAE is recoverable now. I think it's beyond recoverable. But you'd have had direct intervention diplomatically with the Chinese, with the UAE yesterday or the day before, and also with the Saudis and the Qataris. So, and Russia as well as talking. So Russia and China are working together to try to create a peace settlement that will exclude the United States. The United States will not be party to that. And who knows? They could conceivably pull that off. I don't rule out anything on that front.
But I remember, after the 12-day war, we spoke in length. I remember about the damages to Israel's infrastructure, economy, industries. Do we know anything yet about the hit they've taken? Because it is, there's limits on the information coming out, but what do we know? Because it's certainly the reports we're getting, they do not cover, the extent of damage. And so I'm just wondering what we know so far.
It has been substantially worse, and we know that because if they had not caused significant damage, the Israelis would not have the censorship on that they do, because they would allow the media to come in and say, look, our air defense system has worked spectacularly. We haven't been hit. We got all the structures are standing. We're in great shape. They haven't done that because the opposite is true. They've taken a serious drubbing, and they're also working this respite. We're now 8 days into this, and it ends next Monday. We'll see if it gets extended. It may get extended. There is the Trump administration is desperate to get a deal done. And Iran's ready to go back and fight. So we'll see if Trump makes any further concessions. They will portray it as, oh, Iran came begging to the table, begging to please come back. We got to keep talking. That was all Iran's doing. And Iran, there's no guarantee that Iran will come back to the table either.
Yeah, no, well, it's been a few humiliating rounds. I'm thinking when Trump said, we have some constructive talks, so we're not going to hit them. And then for the foreign minister then to come out and say, no, we actually have no talks at all. I mean, if they really wanted a peace, this seems like a very strange game to play.
Yeah.
But what do we know now about the Iranian position, though? Because I spoke to some Iranians now who made the point that they have had that the negotiations seemed, well, let's say, strange in Islamabad. That is, Vance, couldn't really answer questions. He had to pick up the phone or call all the time. God knows who. But also, I was told that at the end, when they thought that the negotiation was still going, Vance essentially and his team just packed up and said, "Okay, I guess we're done," and broke it off. So it's very hard to read this kind of diplomatic behavior.
Yeah, that was I think the most telling part from Professor Morandi, that he didn't have the courtesy to say, "Okay, hey, listen, folks, Foreign Minister Arachi, we've just got to recognize we're at an impasse. We're not going to be able to solve anything at this point. We're going to go now. We're going to go back and brief President Trump, and maybe we can get together next week or the following week to try to see if we can make some more nothing like that. It was just, okay, we're out of here. And the Iranians wake up and say, where'd the Americans go? Oh, they beat it. Now when I first heard that, I sent Professor Morandi a note just saying, "Hey, I hope you guys are talking to the Russians or the Chinese about having them fly you back to Iran, because if you're at least under Chinese or Russian protection, they won't try to kill you. Whereas if you're flying on an Iranian airplane, they'll try to. I wouldn't put it past them to try to shoot you down." I guess what happened is they flew on a Pakistani flagged airline back. That prevented Iran from being attacked by Israel.
Yeah, it's so strange that this is a new thing, killing leaders and negotiators. It's it became normalized a bit too quickly, I feel. But it's gonna make it very difficult to have diplomacy in the future. Indeed, the fact that this wasn't the argument, I remember in this Washington Post article that this should be a form of deterrent. If you don't agree to our deals, we should kill the negotiators personally. Like
Right.
this is very. It doesn't look like a good, stable peace agreement can come from this.
Right.
But overall, though, where do you see this conflict going now? If the blockade's not going to work, the negotiations are moving forward, the military capabilities are built up. I mean, are we going just back to war?
I think that's where we're ultimately headed. I mean, I can see, look, from a logical standpoint, you can see that there's a clear exit ramp here for Trump. They can exit out of this war and try to get an economic solution in place that will start to repair the damage that's been done by having closed down the Strait of Hormuz and having shut down basically the export activities out of United Arab Emirates, Qatar, Saudis. I mean, Bahrain is toast. They're not, the U.S. base there is not coming back. Similarly, Kuwait has suffered some significant damage that may be unrecoverable. But just because we can see the logic in that, let's solve it. The pressure that Trump is under from Bibi Netanyahu is significant, and he's shown that he's unwilling to really confront them and say, look, the United States is going to chart its own path forward. And this leaves unresolved the situation in Gaza. It leaves unresolved the situation in Lebanon. And, I had to go back and look. I didn't realize, but, this Lebanese war has been going on now for 51 years. The civil war in Lebanon between the Christians and the Muslims, the Shia in particular, got kicked off back in 1975 when the Phalangists, this Christian sect, attacked and killed about 35 Shia civilians. and boom, civil war was on, and that raged until it was sort of a truce in 1990. But now in the ensuing uh, in the ensuing 30 years, we still had these constant flare-ups. So 2006, Israel again invades southern Lebanon. There were bombings in Beirut in the 90s. So the conflict has never really gone away. And now in this latest round, Hezbollah's holding its own and inflicting serious damage on Israel, which Israel can't sustain. So I could see the efforts to bring a peace, but to come back to what you said, let's look at what Trump is doing. Is Trump telling U.S. military units, okay, start withdrawing, let's pull back, we're gonna scale down? No, just the opposite. Let's send more. We're ramping up. Now, I think the debacle that happened surrounding the rescue of that downed pilot or the crew member from the F-15 2 weeks ago. I think that has finally persuaded both the Pentagon and the White House that any kind of ground operations out of the question. Just too dangerous, too costly, too unpredictable. So they're going to continue with this economic pressure. One school that's advocating the complete blockade of Iranian ports believes that if we shut down their ability to send oil out, it will ultimately damage their ability to produce oil, and then they'll be in a crisis. They won't have any income, and then they'll implode. And there are some within the Trump administration that give that very serious credence. I think it's crazy, but that's what they're pushing.
But could that be the goal of the ceasefire, though? That is just to lower the intensity, because as the war is going now, the United States is using they're using all these expensive interceptor missiles. Their assets in the Gulf states are being attacked. Israel's getting attacked. So this high intensity war doesn't really work in U.S. advantage. But if one can call a ceasefire and then at the same time begin to gradually bleed the Iranians instead, putting some, blockade on their ports, which would also hurt the Chinese. Essentially have try to assert some escalation control, a little bit like what was achieved in Ukraine, where essentially NATO countries can fire their missiles at Russia and then pretend it's Ukraine and Russia can't respond. Something similar that allows them to begin to drain and mow the lawn, if you will, in Iran without Iran being able to respond in a significant way. Or do you think it's delusional that such a blockade can be enforced properly and Iran would not retaliate in some way?
Yeah, no, I think it's delusional on their part, because the blockade of the ports is not Iran's only outlet. In other words, they can go through Turkmenistan. They can go through. So there are roads in to. It's not their only access to the outside world. Now those ports, volume wise, they can have an effect, but again, I don't think the United States has got the naval power in place to really stop it completely. And particularly if they start using the Chinese. Chinese have signaled very strongly that they're not going to put up with this. And that if any attempt by the United States to interfere with Chinese maritime traffic is going to be resisted.
How so, though? What are the Chinese saying?
Oh, they said they would treat it as an act of war. So,
says it all, I guess.
Yeah. So, I mean, and I know that the U.S. military planners, that's the last thing they want, is to be, to get into a war with China, because I think it's now pretty apparent the United States wouldn't last 2 weeks with China if they actually got into a full-blown war, because we simply don't have the strategic depth. We've drained our inventories of key weapon systems, THAADs, the Patriots, the PAC-3 batteries. JDAMs are way down. JASSMs that we've used extensively, way down, Tomahawks, way down. And then you get to the supply chain problem, which China controls. To rebuild some of those weapon systems, you need the rare earths that China is not providing now. And we don't have a good alternative to go to.
Yeah, it looked like, if China, not if, well, given that China is the main peer competitor of the United States, and ever since the days of Obama back in 2016, at least the goal was to pivot to Asia to contain. None of what's being done now by Trump seems to make much sense. I mean, when he came to power, he suggested, "I'll wrap up the Ukraine war. I'll end the forever wars." I mean, all of this made sense if the objective was to transfer the resources to the Western Hemisphere in East Asia. But now that the US is still fighting in Ukraine, at least selling weapons, it's still has its intelligence assets there, and now also doing this forever war with Iran. It's hard to see how the wider or larger strategic objective, in this massive shift of power, can actually be achieved. It's very strange to watch, given that it looked like Trump had a very strategic outlook when he came in, and how little it corresponds with his actual actions. But let me just ask a last question. How do you think, what will be the wider consequence of this? I mean, of course, energy crisis, we may have food crisis, but without a crystal ball, what do you think are likely developments we might see from this war?
Look, we're trying to figure out what the hell are they going to do. It's going to be the U.S. is losing influence in the Gulf. It basically promised all these Gulfies, "Hey, we got your back. We can protect you. You sign up with us, we'll protect you." Well, it turned out they couldn't protect them. They've been the most bizarre actions and behavior is that of the UAE. They are the most virulently opposed to Iran.
We've got great news for seniors. The Social Security Administration has made a small,
and they've taken the biggest beating of all the with maybe the exception of Bahrain. The Saudis are still they're playing a double game. They're still trying to stay in bed with the United States, but they're under pressure to seek an accommodation with Iran. So they just announced that the pipeline that flows to the Red Sea that had been sabotaged. They already hit the other day. They've now repaired it. They're flowing. The oil's moving again, but they don't move that much oil. I mean, it made it's like 7 million barrels per day, which sounds like a lot, but it's not a lot. It's still 50% about what they were putting out before, and it's still vulnerable. That if this war goes hot, the Houthis will take out that port, that terminus. So the ability of the United States to dictate the future of that region is limited. The power of the U.S. dollar is going away. We saw the auction for Treasury bills. It was it dropped in terms of percentage of foreign buyers. So the Fed had to step in and buy up that amount. So I think you're going to see an expansion of Chinese and Russian influence throughout the Gulf, and I don't see Iran backing off from using, let's say, charging a user's fee. If you come into the Gulf, you're going to have to pay a fee. One way that they're going to recover and pay for the damages that were done as a result of this war launched by the United States and Israel. So Trump's erratic behavior he's not going to get better. In fact, we will see further deterioration. I honestly don't know if he'll make it to the end of his term, because his behavior is so odd, and it's creating real concern now in Washington. So that's going to be at play.
Yeah, the ability to lead.
Kofi, follow me.